Hey everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. I am here with my dude Aris Pina, CompuBox operator, and of course, history guy like myself. And that's what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about some history, but like always, we're here to talk about history that's inspired by recent events. So, Aris, how's it going? Number one and two, bro, we got a fun show.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of those type of fun shows. We'll delve into that in a little bit. Everything's good. Just got back from the Boxing Hall of Fame this past weekend. With my buddy Gray, good friend of our shows. And yeah, that's basically about it. Getting ready to work the lightweight title fight this weekend.
Yeah, heard a lot of things about Canastota this past weekend.
Yeah.
Not a lot of good things, but a lot of things. Heard a lot of things.
I'll just say at this point is that like the years that I used to go when I was younger is certainly not then anymore. And I mean, it's not just like the loss of Graziano's, which is a huge loss in itself and probably like the biggest knife in the gut, but like the fact that they got rid of a lot of other events that they used to partake in earlier years and combine that with the lack of fighters and just people that kind of showed up this year just made it to be like an event that you clearly felt the difference in terms of others, even last year, in fact, and how everything was. So
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. It sounds like it's kind of fallen off in terms of, and I mean, look, there are going to be a lot of people pointing out, look, a number of older fighters have passed away, and that's true. I'm not trying to say they haven't or anything, but another thing to point out as well, and not to kind of like, not in an I told you so tone. However, I did point it out as it was happening was that the COVID pandemic claimed a lot of older fighters and surviving fighters, and I'm kind of like, I was eh. But nonetheless, yeah, it sounds like it was a little bit barren this year, which is really unfortunate, man, because that's like the gathering.
absolutely. And there's still a lot of guys out there. Like I was talking to Tris Dixon and a few others, and they made good points where it's just like, there are like hidden gems if you really think you do some digging of guys you can bring there. Like, Marvin Johnson's still alive. I don't think he's ever really been to the halls, maybe once he has or so. Yaki Lopez, who I know they're trying to get to the Atlantic City Boxing Hall of Fame this year. And Danny Lopez, like you mentioned, still alive. Carlos Zarate, Alfonso Zamora, who I don't even think has ever been to the hall. Like there's a bunch, you can name off all these champions, or if you just put a little bit of
Palomino's
effort.
still around. I mean,
Palomino used to be there all the time. Yeah, a lot of these guys, and they would just, for a chance for
and
them not
that's
to
we
be
just
there.
named a bunch of like West Coast dudes too. Like there's, a
Yeah,
whole bunch of others.
you know, and for various reasons, certain guys can't go there anymore. I know like Iran Barkley had some beef going on, I think, about trying to sell autographs or whatever. Larry Holmes had the same deal, and there's been a few others, but it's like, there's so many guys out there that are still around that you could bring in for that premiere weekend just that one time, and it's the difference has been seen, and that's really about it.
Well, and I mean, I guess if there's issues with these fighters trying to sell stuff or whatever, then it sounds like in the end they got what they wanted. The Hall of Fame got no fighters showing up selling shit, so they just got no fighters showing up.
Well,
No,
I
I
do
mean,
know that two of the people that were supposed to be there when me and Gray were joking about this was Shane Mosley and Riddick Bowe, and they both decided to go to a card signing gig in New Jersey that weekend instead.
well, dude, you know what, dude? They might have been, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened, but nonetheless, that doesn't surprise me because it sounds like it was tame, watered down, and I
Mhm.
hope that's not the
I mean,
direction
I
that
hope
it's
it can
permanently
bounce
headed.
back. Absolutely. I hope it doesn't keep on going that same direction because it was the premier place to be, and it still holds that title, I guess. But like, the way it's treading right now, who knows? But
I don't know, man. I've been seeing the photos from like Nevada Hall of Fame and
Atlantic
New
City
Jersey
Boxing
Hall of
Hall of
Fame, even
Fame.
yeah, Atlantic City Hall of Fame, and a number of these other kind of state Hall of Fames, and they look pretty live, man. I'm not gonna lie. And
Absolutely.
compared to what I was seeing from last weekend, damn, it's a
Yeah,
shame.
I'm planning on going to the Atlantic City one this coming September, and I was looking at the lineup for it, and everything right there is what the old Boxing Hall of Fame kind of was offering back in the day. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Well, dude, I hope that shit turns out then, because I mean, it sounds like it didn't this past weekend. But like I was saying earlier, we're here to talk some boxing history, some
Sure.
actual boxing history, because there wasn't a whole lot of that going on in Canastota. Ah, sorry. One last stab.
Had to. Had to.
Yeah, one last stab. No, we're here to talk some history. And like I said before, on just about every history show we do, almost all of them, we're like inspired by current events or recent events. And this time we're talking about knuckleheads, idiots, dumbasses, funny guys, whatever you want to call them, jokesters. And largely because I saw that you had posted or you had sent me a photo of Adrian Broner's Instagram story, I think it was, him with his
Yeah,
tooth
yeah.
knocked out. Because the guy's just such a dumbass and got his shit just split right in half, got his tooth knocked out and knocked down. And then on top of that, during this exact same time, like it was like the day earlier, maybe a day after, whatever, Ryan Garcia gets fucking arrested and cited for felony vandalism at a hotel. It's some rock star shit. When the guy is like, I mean, he's smack dab in the middle of a weird, he's in weird times right now, weird period, let's just say. So, I mean,
Yeah.
like I was saying earlier to you before we started recording, this is kind of tricky because we're going to be talking. I think we mean it lighthearted. I don't think we're not trying to talk about brutal crimes or anything wild or anything like that necessarily. It's not necessarily a true crime episode, mostly just kind of idiots, guys who do idiotic shit. Except, of course, there's going to be a lot of overlap because many of the guys or many of the fighters that we're going to be talking about did some pretty bad shit too. So I just want to make sure that we're not ignoring that and we're not trying to make light of those things either. But
Oh no, I mean,
nonetheless,
if it has to be acknowledged about how fucked up the situation was, then clearly it's going to be that. You know what I mean?
of course,
But between that, they did do some things that you were just kind of like, oh yeah, yeah, like leading up to whatever the culmination of things over there. But it's just like, yeah, yeah, you can't help but like when you think of like knucklehead fighters or just dudes who are just doing like dumb shit outside of the ring, is some even inside the ring for that matter too, like there's head scratching decisions where it's just like it clearly goes with their vibe of just like, wait, what the hell are you watching, you know what I mean? And so like I'm gonna start more modern here, but like when we kind of broach this subject, first dude I clearly thought of is someone who I think is still active. I think he had a fight scheduled on BoxRec. I don't know if it went through or not, but Victor Ortiz. Because I mean, when you think of absolute just knucklehead, well, that was Victor back in the day. Like he was, even when he was still back when he was like a good like coming up as a future star, you would see him on like the undercards of the pay-per-views and stuff like that and being built up. He just kind of had this aloof demeanor to him that you interviewed him after a fight and stuff. And like I remember, for instance, he knocks out Jeffrey Resto, I think it was, right? On the Pacquiao De La Hoya undercard. And they alluded to the fact that Oscar had that he gave like Oscar a shiner in sparring where he beat him up or something, but I don't know. Him and Edwin Velo, I guess, took turns beating up Oscar for that one. But anyways, after that, I remember after the fight, they were interviewing him and stuff, and they're like, even then, he was like, "Oh, I don't know, man. Like it was like sparring and stuff, just like very, like singing, like he just like he was like he was a young kid, you know what I mean? Like he was getting pushed really hard. He clearly had talent and stuff like that, but he just like you kind of seemed airheaded. But then, as it goes on, his career just became an absolute roller coaster that we kind of enjoyed and kind of hoped that it wouldn't just hit the skids really bad either, right?
dude, your New Bedford accent just came out just for a second, like super hardcore right there. It was pretty
Which
funny.
one? What word?
You're getting pretty ad.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Sorry, I just had to point it out because you
definitely.
usually don't let it slip.
I mean, I've been living in New York for so long that I don't even think I have a Massachusetts accent anymore, but sometimes there it is.
Yeah, it was funny. No, he definitely has that dumbassy kind of surfer, like,
Yeah,
yeah, type of thing. In just about every interview I've ever seen anyway.
sure. So like, all right, you were on the West Coast scene back then, when the Victor Ortiz was coming up. What was like the whole scene? I mean, like, the story.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for like what happens on the East Coast, obviously, because I'm not there and I'm not really in any West Coast circles either. But I used to cover fights a lot more around this time and whatnot. And so yeah, like I would imagine it's probably works a similar way on the East Coast or Midwest or wherever, that there generally tend to be like gym fighters or fighters that you hear about, or like, oh yeah, that's the guy that was sparring so and so, and there was, these stories about it and shit. And so like I remember hearing all sorts of shit like or back in the day in like the mid 2000s when there would be like that generation's version of a viral video
Sure.
or like an underground video that was spreading around like before Max Boxing had put it out. There was all the rumors about Margarito and Sergio Mora having some crazy sparring session. And it wound up true. Like it was actually a really good sparring session. Fucking Margarito like sent his fucking headgear like flying across the gym at one point. It was pretty crazy. But, shit like that. Point is, I remember hearing about Edwin Valero. I remember hearing about Victor Ortiz, like those, and Golden Boy seemed to have not a lock, but a number of those kinds of gym legend type fighters right around that time. And so Victor Ortiz, well, a lot of people might not remember the story or they might not know it, but Victor Ortiz is originally from I want to say Kansas City. I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
And
Yeah, him and Brandon Rios were
yeah,
rivals. They're from the
yeah,
same.
and
Yeah.
so he and Brandon Rios were kind of like in the amateurs in like the same camp or whatever together,
That's
and
right.
that's what Brandon Rios is kind of like, fucking razzed on him, for years and shit like that, saying he was a big crybaby and a front runner who would like, be kicking ass, but if you hit him back, he'd start crying and he'd quit and shit like that. And he said he was always like that. And I mean, looking back, you could kind of buy it. I mean, just kind of the way that Ortiz is. But they came they came west and kind of started working out in gyms and getting better. Like Kansas City used to be in the Midwest and kind of areas like that, Chicago, Kansas City, Indianapolis, even all used to have big Golden Gloves tournaments that used to mean something. Now I couldn't even fucking tell you shit. It's basically New York or bust, pretty much. But like, this was still in that time. But anyway, they'd nonetheless come west because a lot of the good sparring was out west and in LA and around LA, Indio, Coachella, etc. And so they had come out, and that's when they had both started kind of getting some play, except for Brennan, I think, was already, they already knew that he was kind of like a warrior. Like he had, for the most part, one style. Victor Ortiz was more of like a boxer puncher that a lot of people thought had a lot of promise. He did have a lot of promise. He was very talented, hit hard. But yeah, dude, it was just that he opened his mouth. I mean, I'm trying to just think of the numerous kind of weird shit he said. Like the one time he went to a fucking event that was like a fundraiser for diabetes and he's getting fucking interviewed. He's like, yeah, diabetes, it's fucking crazy. It's a cool thing though. Guy was such a weirdo. And the fucking, yeah, I'm like a tree, bro. Literally. And people are like, wait, 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 wait. I don't think you know what literally means, dude. Like,
Mhm.
what the He's such a fucking weirdo. He just said the craziest surfer idiot shit.
Yeah, there was that time I think before the Floyd fight when they were doing the 24/7s or whatever, and he was walking through I don't know if it was the MGM Grand or wherever it was, but like all of a sudden he turns around and he sees a photo of Kenny Chesney. He's like, Kenny Chesney, oh, and all excited, and he was just. But you know what? Besides all the aloofness and goofiness and stuff like that, he made for fun fights because his style made for it. Like he was explosive. He was a front runner. Everything Brandon Rios kind of said about him was true, and that's what made his shit dramatic. So like he going from there, he finally after making a couple of like pay-per-view undercard appearances, he makes it on like Boxing After Dark. And I think I worked a couple of them because that was the early days of Punch Zone. So I definitely worked his fight with Arnon, what was it,
Yeah, I
Mike
was gonna
Arnon?
say, didn't he beat up Mike Arnautis?
Beat the shit out of him. Poor guy. Yeah. Arnoldus was like not a bad fighter from that time. I think,
Yeah, a
he
very
was,
good, like upper level ESPN2 fighter.
yeah. I think he even fought for a belt at one point or another, but like
He's a
he
good
seemed
fighter.
smaller. He seemed like, much more tinier than what Ortiz was. Ortiz obviously was like a big dude. He had a big back and everything like that. And he just bullied him and blasted him in 2 rounds. So that was a good win. And then he had the Maidana fight, and who can forget that? That one was an absolute fucking barn burner in itself.
And well, and I think that was the kind of eye opener too. That was
Yeah.
what everybody, that was the glimpse into his future in a way, or Or if you want to get more poetic about it or whatever, how they say, you can't hide in a ring. Whoever it is that you are is going to come out no matter what. If you're a
Sure.
fucking coward, you're gonna see. If you're somebody willing to die in there, is objectively stupid as that is.
Mhm.
But if you nonetheless are somebody, and that's something that you know, if you're willing to die in there, that comes out too, and everybody will see that. And that's exactly what we saw against Maidana, is that like in retrospect, that was a tough fight, dude. He took some shots, but you could also kind of see at a couple points where that he was like, "What am I doing here? What the fuck? I thought this guy was going to come to lay down. He ain't lying
Absolutely.
down. What the fuck?" And then the interview at the end where he said something to the effect of like, "Man, I don't think I deserve to be getting hit like this." And it was like,
That's right. I forgot he said that. Yeah.
it was
Mhm.
kind of just like, you might be objectively correct, but you stepped in there though.
Yeah,
You
like
accepted the money and you stepped in there. So that, but I guess that's kind of paradoxical, and it makes us, like I said, objectively, you might be correct. Yeah, you probably should be doing some other fucking job, Victor Ortiz. You probably are not the dude who should be in there getting hit in the head for sure. But that's the contract you signed, buddy.
yeah, I mean, absolutely. Then, soon after that, though, he has the absolute war with Berto. Emmanuel Stewart almost loses his mind during that one. We all did too. That was a great
That was
fight.
a
Absolutely
great
great.
fight. Yeah, even the rematch was good.
Oh yeah, totally, totally. But him beating Berto the way he did, Berto being undefeated, I think he was right. Both of them
Yeah, I
trading
think so.
multiple knockdowns. It was just a wild. And Ortiz didn't quit. When the time he got dropped, he got back up. He dropped Berto again. Everything like that. It just made it for the fight with Floyd. And this is what I mean, where we saw the clear knuckleheadness of everything come, full circle, like full force. And it's because like oh, listen, man, I'm sure this was like the biggest stage Ortiz was ever on, clearly. Like he was ever gonna be on. That was like a massive fight. This was Floyd's comeback. Remember when he announced it on Twitter saying, May 5th or whatever, Victor Ortiz, Vegas, see you there, some shit. And even then, like the early days of boxing Twitter, everyone was just on like, oh boy, here we go. And we
Well, and
just,
I remember it even then being kind of a weird choice. People are like, Victor Ortiz?
well, yeah, but you almost got like not surprisingly too because Ortiz was hot coming off the Berto win, and you would think if Berto had won that fight, maybe Floyd had come back to fight Berto.
And that was part of what started the whole, if you beat Andre Berto, you
Yeah.
get the shot
Yes.
at Floyd fucking thing. Remember?
Until finally Floyd just beat Berto on its own. Just
Yeah.
yeah.
You just got to
Well,
cut out the middleman at some point.
yeah. But oh boy.
Fun, weird, stupid times.
Absolutely. But the first time though, when Ortiz did it, that did make sense in the whole scheme of things, I guess. When for Floyd's comeback opponent. Because Floyd has always been kind of like favored the WBC over everything. He was always kind of fighting for their belts. Always sitting with his collection of minions behind them carrying WBC belts. So the fact that Ortiz was WBC champion made sense. But I mean, like, he wasn't doing bad in that fight. That's the thing. I don't know why, like, whatever, like, triggered in his mind to do it. Like, yeah, he was losing the first couple of rounds, but like in round five, when he finally started like getting aggressive, he had some success. He got Floyd on ropes, he landed a couple of combinations or whatever, and then he just completely lost it. I mean, I was in the studio watching that. You know what I mean? Again, like we were doing Punch Zone that day, and we all were just kind of like, wait, okay, he hit some headbutts him twice and stuff, right? And then that's when he started with the overly trying to hug him. And I think he kissed him at one point, trying to apologize and hugging him and hugging him, hugging him. I'm like, oh boy, this ain't gonna end well. And I had a feeling in the back of my mind Floyd was gonna do what he did. And then when it actually happened, I'm just like, holy shit. And you hear Emmanuel Stewart, oh God. And yeah.
It, I don't I wouldn't say this if it weren't true, but I called that shit. Like,
Yeah.
and not exactly. Like, I wasn't like, oh, he's gonna, sucker punch him, or hit him on the break, whatever you want to call it. But like, I did say, I wrote an article before then that I said basically, Victor Ortiz is kind of crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and that he does kind of crazy shit in the ring sometimes, and that if he does crazy shit in the ring, Floyd has a history of when fighters do crazy shit to him, he starts getting real mean. Like he gets like
Yeah.
nasty. And that's exactly what happened. because he does have a history of like if you try to forearm him, headbutt him, he'll start doing it back and worse and sneakier, and he's better at it. And he's a mean when he gets mean like that, it's gross. And that's what happened. And yeah, dude, like you could see that Victor Ortiz, he's southpaw. The southpaw puncher is a fucking nightmare. That'd be like one of the last fucking styles I'd ever want to face as a southpaw puncher.
Yeah.
And he's kind of bullying Mayweather to the ropes, and it almost seemed to me like Floyd, when he was like, all right, well then I'm going to start like using my forearm and like put my fore and my elbow up in his neck, that when Victor Ortiz was like, oh well then we're going to start escalating it back and forth, then you know what I mean,
Mhm.
except for he went directly to headbutt in the face, which is, you don't know, you should have used your forearm, you should have fucking you
Yeah,
got to go
yeah.
tit for tat. You can't just like, oh, you're going to touch me, I'm going to kill you then, no, you can't. But that's what he did. He fucking headbutted him. And on top of that, he didn't even headbutt him very good. And then Floyd's like, head. He's like, all over his face because he didn't even headbutt him that hard. And he said, oh, what the fuck? And yeah. And then Ortiz did like the overly apologetic thing. Bro, I laughed so hard when that happened. I like laughed hysterically because I was like, he deserved it for fouling. He deserved that shit. He should not have been overly apologetic, and he was stupid not to put his hands up. However, I can believe those things, but still say, yeah, Floyd, you're a dick for doing that, Till. Yeah.
Oh, of course he was, but like it's still like you said,
It was
tit for tat.
deserved, but you're still a
It was
dick.
absolutely deserved. Yeah, but I had a feeling he was going to do that after when the third time when he was like, okay, and then Ortiz puts his hands up again, and Cortez was the referee, right? Um,
Yeah, because there's the famous photo of him going off into
yeah,
the crowd as he's hitting him because he's like, Ortiz or fucking Cortez is an awful referee, always
hits him
was.
with a hook, wow, and then you see Ortiz, oh, look at that, and then he hits
Huh?
the right hand, and yeah, and then just lays him out right there.
Yeah, that's like probably the hardest punch Floyd's ever thrown in his life. Like, for
I mean, he
real.
full open jaw right there for you to swing at. Why not? Just took him.
Like I
Kapow.
said, I
Yeah,
don't disagree with what he did necessarily, but I can agree with it, but still think he was a dick.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, his career never really recovered. We still had fun fights that he would end up losing or wildly, He never really won a big fight again after that. I don't think he lost the Lopez, which was another great fight, but then he gets his jaw busted. And that was like what was it? Gus Johnson was the commentator, and he just kept on screaming over and over, "Oh, Sasato! Oh, Sasato! Wow!" Yeah. Um,
Dude, giving me
uh,
some PTSD.
yeah, right. the the Berto rematch, which
Nuts
was a lot
and
of fun as
guts.
well. Oh God. The Berto rematch was good, was great as well. I
Yeah,
don't know.
he came
I mean,
within a hair of winning that again,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. And I'm assuming there was a couple of others too that I'm missing, but I mean, he always just made for fun fights, but just inside the ring, and I know he had some antics outside the ring too that's like got him in trouble. So it's like you know.
face lube.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Remember that shit? That
Dude,
shit
I
was
thought about
around
it
for
for
a minute.
a long, long time.
Shit was around for a minute, dude. Yeah, the guy was he's a goofball. And like I said earlier, I'm well aware that it went beyond goofballism, and in recent years he's gotten into some real trouble. But for our purposes here, definitely fits the bill for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely. So,
Well, I'm gonna also go around the same time frame just to kind of stick with that boxing Twitter nostalgia and go Julio Cesar
yeah.
Chavez Jr., who I'm
Oh,
also aware in recent
good
years
one.
does need actual intervention and help. I hope he's gotten,
Yeah.
but on the level of the late 2000s and early 2010s, legendary, just absolute legendary boxing dumbass, hilarious, joke worthy meme fucking factory. Love him.
I mean, bro, the that still photo of him eating cereal in his like in his pink boxers or whatever it was.
No,
While
those pink
Chavez,
fucking skivvies. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. While Chavez Senior is over there trying to give him like fight techniques, and he's just
Yeah.
like clearly just smoked a bowl before that.
Yeah. Just woke up and it's like 3 in the afternoon.
Yeah,
Yeah. Senior's just like, all right, so you got to go in and get jabbed and then come into the body. And he's like, Yeah,
Hmm.
that shit
Eyes
was
just
fucking
blanked
great.
out and everything. Yeah, man, the Chavez Jr. thing was just crazy when it first started. So it started we if you're an old school fan like us and obviously listeners of the show are, you remember him when he was a kid because he was the one with the big eyes and the gap tooth that was always on
Massive
the
head.
bed. Yep, massive head even back then. Always with the bandana around his head with the rest of the team, and he was always on his dad's shoulders or accompanying him sideward, holding the belt, doing some shit. And he was there for the wins, for the losses, the Whitaker fight, the Randall fight, everything. You always just saw him around. And kind of forgot about him, I guess, because as he got older, he wasn't there as frequently. Chavez's career was winding down and such, but all of a sudden you find out he's turning pro. And not only is he turning pro, he's doing it. I don't think he had an amateur career, correct? I know he had like a couple of exhibitions and a fight with Paez Jr. and stuff, but I don't know if he really like had an actual amateur career.
I don't think
So
so.
well, that's why Top Rank signs him immediately because they know money when they see it, and having the kid of Chavez, unless he's absolutely horrendous, um, is gonna be able to. They can make money with that, and so they did what any experienced company and matchmakers would do with a person with little to no experience. They built him from the ground up, kind of like what they did with Deontay Wilder, except unlike Wilder, where they kept him off of TV for a number of time, you see little brief clips here and there of him, waddling around the ring doing whatever. But like Chavez's career was really from the jump already featured on pay-per-views and
Yep.
such. And everyone was just like, "Oh my god, this nepotism, blah blah blah." And yes, absolutely it was. But like, you saw him from this gangly dude from 140 pounds who just looked like sick and anemic or something. You know what I mean? Like you said, the giant head, long arms, everything. He kind of like resembled a slightly bigger, like Mexican Sandy Sadler, I guess, in terms of build, right? And it was like, I don't know, he just you just watched him develop. But no one really thought like he would reach the heights he would end up doing. Like you'd maybe think he'd fight for a regional belt, but someone was going to expose him sooner or later. But to Top Rank's credit, they built him up well.
Yeah, dude. I mean, you summed it up pretty well. I remember right around when he was first coming up, and he was usually in like a pay-per-view opener or something like that, but he was on a bunch of them. And I actually remember too around that time, that was when I was like covering a bunch of fights in Southern California and Vegas. And I remember there were a bunch of people like in those kind of fight circles, like one of the dudes who worked for Everlast and shit like that, talking about fucking oh yeah, there's rumors going around that Chavez Jr. is actually older than what they're saying. And I remember thinking, there were photos of him in Sports Illustrated as a kid. What the
Yeah.
fuck are you talking about?
Like
Like you
he was,
can
yes.
he's been in like the limelight since he was a child. What do you think they're like hiding his age? What are you talking about? I remember thinking that and being like, "What?" Dude, there were rumors for several years that like they were like, "Oh no, they're putting him on these undercards because they're saying he's 22, but he's actually like 27." And I'm like, I remember being like, "That makes no fucking sense, bro." Okay. But they did. They stuck him on a bunch of yeah, I know. Stupid.
Always a running trend that anybody that's not from the US, you got to question their age because they're supposedly either old,
Yeah,
they're
like
old.
every African fighter ever, they
Yes.
always do that. And it's like, Jesus Christ, you guys. God damn. But the funny thing was about is that everybody was like, they knew some fucking information that like that was secret and nobody knew that secret information. What? He's like a small child and there's photo of him in Sports Illustrated. Shut up, dude.
Yeah.
People are dumb. But that rumor was around for like a few years, dude. They were trying to pump that shit. It was just that he was gangly. He hadn't grown into his body. He was kind of uncoordinated. He never really got that coordinated, you know. He wasn't
I don't
very
know.
fast. His fundamentals were like but he could punch a little bit. That was pretty much all it came down to is he could punch a little bit. He was kind of like swarming a bunch of these opponents. Some of the opponents were straight bad. And didn't at some point didn't he beat up what's his name? Grover Wiley?
He did. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, didn't he get vengeance on
Yeah,
Grover
absolutely.
Wiley?
I think that might have been. I don't know if that was its own pay-per-view main event for one of those Latin Furies or something or another, but
It,
like
it might have been, dude. It
he
might
did
have
get
been.
revenge on him, and
I would
but at
not
this
put
point,
that
he was
past
starting
them.
to show that he was like starting to have a little bit of skill here and there. You know what I mean? Like clearly he was a work in progress, but like he knew how to throw a hook to the body already at that point. I mean, probably born knowing how to do that, but like he he was growing. Like each year he was getting, he wasn't looking as like sickly and he was, filling out a little bit more. And as he kept on going, the competition kind of started getting better, right? Like, after a couple of years and like the
He
laughable
eased his way up.
he eased his way up, exactly. Like he beats up Grover Wiley and then eventually he fights when was that? What was that guy that was a number one contender for whatever reason? Then he got knocked out by some guy called Spiderweb. Jose Salaya.
Oh my
Salaya.
gosh, yeah.
Remember him?
I do.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, that was another one of those gym guys.
Was it?
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
interesting. Yeah. So I know he beats him and he's still meandering around, but eventually he gets to the point where he fights a guy like, I don't have his record up and I don't care to go through it, but like he eventually fights a guy like John Duddy, right? Like that's when he starts getting to like closer to his apex, so to speak.
Yeah, top ranks attempt to bust into the fucking, Irish market basically.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And Duddy was a really fun fighter, man. I mean, me being from the East Coast and being from breaking into the business
Yeah,
around.
nothing wrong with him. He just wasn't on that level.
No, I mean, he busted up easy, had no defense whatsoever, threw a lot of punches, but wasn't a heavy puncher himself. So, I mean, there was clearly going to be like a limit to where he could go. But by the time that he was around, he made for fun fights. But yeah, after Chavez beats him up and stuff like that, and keeps on winning a number of other ones, eventually he gets that title shot, and now you're like, oh, okay, well, it's a gimme shot too, right? Because he fights I don't remember the guy's name, Sebastian Zivik or something like that.
Yeah.
Undersized dude, clearly, one of those champions that was in Germany. He's being enticed to come to the US, so clearly, like the everything's kind of written in stone of where it's supposed to go, and Chavez wins it. But I'll give him this: it was after that win, even though he's still such an aloof goof, and you still see all this type of way about him. He put together a nice little run after that.
Yeah, he actually that was what was kind of surprising was that he turned into, actually like he started kind of actually going up the like
Yeah,
the contender ladder or whatever you want to call it. In facing fighters who were increasingly actually kind of decent. You know what I
sure.
mean? Went from Sebastian Zibik to Peter Manfredo, who obviously had seen better days, and also on the days that he was better, where there was kind of questionable, what level he was actually at. But hey, dude, Manfredo wasn't a bad fighter. He got a couple
New
of
England, bro. New England fighters, all right? I get it.
he got a shitty break against Calzaghe. I thought that was an absolute shite fucking stoppage. Although I don't think he would have gone on to win, but still,
Hell no.
shite stoppage. And then Marco Antonio Rubio, who was kind of, a second tier kind of contender type of guy.
Mhm.
And then Andy Lee. I remember when he got the stoppage over Andy Lee, that was huge because it was a lot of people thought Andy Lee was more the level of fighter who should be able to beat a Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. type of fighter. And when he didn't, people were like, oh, okay.
And it was that size of him too. He used his size advantage, obviously, and he had a good chin to bully these dudes up because Lee was outboxing him and landing that lethal
Yeah,
left
he
hand.
just Frankenstein him down.
Yeah, just kept on wearing him down. And Lee was never that type of guy that could take a ton of punishment. Like if you were able to like get in on him, you could beat him up a little bit, and that's what Chavez did. He just grinded him down. He's bigger than Rubio, who obviously too wasn't like a world beater, but a tough guy, and beat him up. And same thing with Manfredo. So that I guess brought him into the Martinez fight. And that was like, bro, I just remember that too because Martinez, rightfully so, was pissed off. You know what I mean? Like he was the middleweight champion, and I
Yeah, he
think
got hosed.
he got stripped of the belt for some whatever reason. Right? I don't remember the reasonings behind it, but like he got stripped. After he got stripped, he was pissed. And Chavez coming in and all this other shit, and like Martinez like, yo, I'm gonna like beat the shit out of this kid. Like I don't have time for this. And I remember when HBO was doing those what was those face-offs that Max Kellerman used to do. Remember?
Forcing the fighters to sit on the backwards chairs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. While he moderated them talking shit to each other, most of them were just kind of like, meh,
They
right?
turned out good, but not because of him.
Exactly. But none of them like really had like that type of fire. Like Mayweather would always be running his mouth and the other guy wouldn't be able to keep up with him, or they would just kind of be like cordial, whatever, right? That was the first one where like you saw Martinez because he was always like a happy-go-lucky guy, very smiley and complimentary of his opponents and everything else. Nah, he was pissed. Like immediately he sat down. He was like, "Fuck you. You're only here because of your dad. You don't do nothing. You blah 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 blah." And
And there was, and at one point, like he was talking shit, and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. is just like, uh-huh, yeah, uh-huh, and just kept like going like, yeah, say more, say more. And I remember being like, oh my God, this guy's a fucking lunatic. This fight's gonna be crazy. I mean, it was for
exactly,
like 2 rounds.
yeah, right. Because like the first 10 and a half were no, first 11 for that matter were just on
Yeah.
Martinez. He did what he wanted. Chavez couldn't touch him. Everything that we saw in the lead up to that fight, well, sometimes they like you think that they'd be editing shows or whatever to try to make it look a little bit more ridiculous than it is. Okay, him eating the cereal in his briefs and shit while his dad is trying to give him instructions at like 1 in the afternoon is hilarious in itself. But you think, okay, they just edited. That's not really like something that was happening all the time. This dude's probably deep in the trenches, right? And then you see him training in his house, and you're like, well, okay, whatever. Still, you're not really thinking of it. Okay, it's just for camera. Maybe they set up a heavy bag for them to do that, try to keep the narrative. No, it played out in that fight that literally everything you saw on camera that day was actually probably how he was doing it in the lead up to that fight. He had gotten a big head, no pun intended, and he like just thought that like at that point because it was so successful against everybody else that his size would just be able to overpower anybody and the fact that he could take a punch. And it almost did too because, he almost took Martinez out in the 12th. And what we realized afterwards was that Martinez, to his credit, I'm shocked that he was able to recover from that because it wasn't so much that he was hurt from Chavez. Like, he got dropped and he was a little hurt, but like he got up clear headed. It was that his knee was completely shattered after that. I think, the way he got knocked down, his knee he tore whatever it was. Ended up becoming the knee problems that he had for the rest of his career. But like after his knee got tore up, the fact that he was able to still maneuver around the ring and Chavez was so slow and sloppy and not good as a finisher that he wasn't able to catch a guy like that. And he had almost 2 minutes to finish him too, you know? So
Yeah, it was like he couldn't like keep it together, and he couldn't,
yeah.
just kind of hone it in. But I do remember Martinez saying that like back in the day when he had first started his boxing career, I think he said he used to do cycling, like bicycling, and he had
Mhm.
messed up his knee doing that, or that maybe it was that he was fighting and went to bicycling because he messed up his knee or so. I can't remember exactly what happened, but I know that he had some old injury that got aggravated and then like against Chavez Jr. But yeah, dude, like that last round was exciting as shit. And I remember that weekend because that was the weekend of Canelo versus Josecito Lopez. It was the same night in the same fucking city across town. They had fucking Martinez Chavez Jr. over at Thomas and Mack. And then at MGM, Grand Garden Arena, was at Canelo versus Lopez, which I was covering, which was like one of the worst fucking fight covering experiences of my life. I literally got like, I was so just brief. I swear I'll go right back to the fight in a second, but I was as far away as you could possibly be from the ring. My
Yeah.
back was against the concrete of the arena on the highest possible seat
Hey.
there was no Wi-Fi and nowhere to plug in anything. And I remember being like, wow, so I guess I'm just watching the fight from up here, eh? Cool. And there were a couple dudes next to me who were from like foreign news agencies that were
Yeah.
trying to ask me in a language I definitely did not understand at all what they should be doing as far as plugging in their laptops and shit.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, there's nothing, bro. Good luck.
Why they send you to the hinterlands, man?
It was, I don't know, it was awful. But what I can tell you was that there were like 10 to 15 separate media or press row seats taken up by the ring slash Golden Boy employees. They needed a whole lot of coverage of that Canelo fight, I guess. But anyway, not bitter at all, guys. Not bitter at all. But anyway, yeah, no, it was crazy because I didn't know what had happened in the fight. I was covering the fucking fights for Queensberry Rules back in the day. And so then I'm getting texts and shit like that. And I'm like, what every like 20 minutes when I'm getting some sort of update on my phone from Twitter because I've got like zero fucking Wi-Fi. I'm like, oh shit must be going down, watching the fight. Oh, damn. And then so I finally, when I talked to everybody afterward, they were like, oh man, it was fucking awful except for the last round. The undercard wasn't even all that good either. It was just that one round, but everybody's buzzing because that one fucking round.
Oh, absolutely, man. It was crazy. I remember I brought my ex-girlfriend to the studio because she had a crush on Martinez and she lost her shit when she saw him get knocked down. She thought he was gonna get knocked out. But he never learned after that. You know what I mean? You would think after losing a fight like that, and I remember a couple of people in media were like, "Man," because a couple of them were like, they said that they predicted Chavez would win. And they're like, "Man, I almost called it. Chavez almost stopped him in the last round." I was like, "Yeah, but did you watch like the first 11 and a half rounds before that? What do you just because he caught him near the end, I don't, like stop, bro. Like you act like he beat him up and almost, I don't, whatever. But he, the knuckleheadness really, really is apt for him because he never learned after that. Like he still thought that okay, because of just his name and thinking he had some natural superpowers or his size was going to do shit. It didn't. And when he finally started fighting guys his own size and dudes he wasn't able to bully, he started getting his ass kicked because of it. I mean, look when he fought what's his name there, Fonfara. That was like during the early days of PBC when you had like a boxing card on 15 different networks within like 2 hours of each other, right? And I don't know which channel that one ended up being on, but that was like the main event of a show that Chavez was supposed to win. I think that was being held at the Home Depot Center, right?
I think
Um,
so, yeah.
but that was the first fight where, his size didn't mean shit because Fonfara was a natural light heavyweight who was tall and big for his division as well, and wasn't a guy that was able to get bullied. Like you could hurt him, but you certainly weren't going to bully him. And Chavez never had one punch knockout power. And that was apparent in that fight because he tried pulling that same shit and Fonfara just beat the hell out of him for it. Knocked him around, knocked him down for the first time, and just generally yoked him until he finally quit. He got stopped. And that was it was kind of fitting to see that happen to him finally, like a guy like that was always being a weight bully and kind of used his size to his advantage, get their comeuppance like that against a guy who's the size and just generally beats them up on the inside at their own game and then eventually stops them. But then from there, he's always been hitting the skids.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that, well, I can't say obviously. It seems obvious to me anyway that his style of not having a very good defense and taking punches to the head for the most part, that is his defense, uh, did not suit him. And I mean, we're mostly trying to keep it pretty lighthearted and funny, but there obviously is an element of tragedy to Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. that we've talked about before. I don't know if we've ever talked about on a show, but I know we've talked about it before away from the show. Where, dude, I feel bad for the guy, obviously, because he was raised in the shadow of his dad, who's not only one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time, perhaps the greatest, and beyond whether you think he's the greatest, top three, whatever, he's definitely the most beloved Mexican fighter of all time, for sure. And
Absolutely.
so you're having to grow up knowing that that's your dad, that when it comes to at least in his realm in boxing, there's almost nothing you can do to ever top that. And so, I'd have to imagine that eats at a person. That's got to eat at you psychologically. And then on top of that, a lot of his childhood, hopefully I'm not dragging people down, listen to this, but a lot of his childhood, his dad spent doing drugs and drinking and being a celebrity, and then, so he probably feels like he got cheated out of a normal childhood. And then now that his dad is like, more with it and sober or at least more sober and fucking, but at the very least clearly making an effort trying to like reach out to his kids and specifically Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. has kind of just gone into another direction, still thinking needs to like seek his dad's love. And, it's sad, bro. It's really is sad. And seeing that he felt that he had to do that through boxing again is sad because that shit's damaging. And even so, man, I mean, he wound up accomplishing a lot more than a lot of people thought that he would accomplish. A lot of people thought that he was a total fucking fake. Maybe some people still believe he was, but I think that he did accomplish some things that showed that at least for a brief period, he was a real fighter.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. He was tough. You know what I mean? It's sad that he's still trying to linger on and he has that fight that's going to be on the Tyson Paul undercard, right? Against some UFC guy or something. Um,
Supposedly, yeah. I mean, I think he's had like several things now where like he's supposed to have a fight and then it falls through or doesn't. Yes, I don't know, but I
but I
hope he
just wish,
doesn't.
like you said, I wish him the best, man. Because again, he's been through a lot in his life. He's had to go through a lot of just had a really tough childhood and other things that I'm sure will come to light one day if he ever like really discusses it in public. But it's like It's tough, it really is.
And
But
one of the guys we could be talking about who last I'll say on this is that I honestly think from what I could tell seems like a good dude. He does seem like a good kid.
Chavez Jr.
Yeah. He
Oh,
seems like a
absolutely.
good kid, just a
Always seemed
misguided
like
goofball.
yeah, yeah. He just always seemed like a good guy. Always, you never really heard anything about him like,
At least
um,
I haven't.
yeah. So, and now even on all his posts, he looks like a guy you want to hang out with. I mean, you're probably gonna get trashed with him, but like, he looks fun.
Yeah, he looks like a goofball.
Yeah, totally. Um, so we're gonna go back to the '90s. And if you really want to talk about knuckleheads and just weird career decisions and other things of that nature, we don't have to talk about them too long because we did an entire episode on them. But if you're going to talk about people like this, you got to bring up Tommy Morrison, at least briefly.
Yeah, for sure. And like and like I said too, there's going to be a lot of overlap.
Totally.
A lot of overlap. But there's also there's a lot of room for nostalgia in here too. And he's definitely got some nostalgia. Even for us, we're like 90s kids, 80s/90s kids, you know?
Totally. And that, I discussed how much of a fan I was of Morrison coming up because he was exciting to watch and he made for good fights. He was in Rocky Five. So he had that appeal of like watching, all of us watched that as a kid or we might have. And right away, like he was just featured all the time, you know what I mean? Good looking dude and stuff like that. And that was had a massive left hook and could take anyone out. So made for good fights. It's just that like a lot of his decision wise, some of his fights, you just knew first off, that he didn't come in prepared for a lot of them half the time. You know what I mean? Sometimes they give it setups and you just end up looking like shit in them for whatever reason. But then there was also, the ones where the massive head scratcher, where this is why you have to put him in this, the thing of just like absolute knucklehead behavior. He has a fight lined up with Lennox Lewis, who was a WBC champ at the time, right? Man, Morrison, WBO, even though that was like spurious and no one really considered that belt, he still with the appeal because he just beat George Foreman. And how many millions was it that he was scheduled to get? A nice little stack there at that
It's like
point, like 50 million or something, right? Or more.
I can't remember well, I know it was in the millions for
Yeah.
sure. But and it was a fucking massive payday, but
Absolutely. But the thing that was just like, what you thinking? Everybody tells him, do not take an intern fight. Do not go, oh, I want a hometown fight. You don't need a hometown fight. Just hold off for a minute and cash in against Lennox. No, no, I want a hometown fight. And other people telling him, yeah, yeah, Tommy, it's going to be big, which it would be obviously because, if he holds in his hometown, him coming back as the reigning champion and a supposed gimme, it was going to pack the place out. But everyone is just saying, don't risk it. Like, especially with a dude like Morrison, who's never really left home to begin with. He always just kind of kept his bases there. Never left for training camp. Never like, relocated somewhere where he could like be more just, I guess, honed in instead of just running around like a maniac. He insisted on it. So they end up fighting Michael Bent, who they thought was like an unassuming, even though he was a good amateur, but a guy that lost his pro debut and only had like 11 pro fights or something at that point. So supposed to be a gimme, and then he blows it. Not only does he blow it, like he comes out there head of steam, wobbles him immediately, and because he had bad defense and he's an idiot and just walked right in, he gets that goofy look on his face because he got hit with in between a combination, gets up, gets dropped two more times, blows it all.
so had it been somewhere else, what do you think would have happened? Like if there were no three knockdown rule? Because that's what wound up gotten him. I mean,
Yeah.
well, hold on, let me rephrase that. What wound up getting him was getting hit by massive punches. But I mean, it almost seemed like maybe he could have survived if there were no three knockdown rule. But even so, like he wasn't in great shape.
I don't think he would have survived that round, man. There was Bent that first knockdown was pretty legit. Like Morrison hurt him. Bent went running into the ropes, and you almost could call that a knockdown in its sense too, because if the ropes weren't there, Bent would have went flying into the audience. You know what I mean? Like that was he got hit hard there with a hook, and problem was with a guy like Morrison and what made him so exciting back then is that like if he hurt you, he would try to go in for the kill, and he was a great finisher, but his defense, which was never exemplary to begin with, would always wane even more so at that point because he'd leave himself open. He can leave himself open for counter punches, mainly like right hands or uppercuts, or like if you're willing to trade with him, which was a dangerous proposition because he did have fast hands too. You had a chance to like catching him. If you can catch him, you can hurt him, and that's what Bent did because Bent had faster hands than Morrison, and he was composed. Like this is a dude who, like we mentioned, had a very, very extensive amateur career where he fought all over the world and fought, a who's who of what was around. Like even though his pro career hadn't really panned out much at that point, he knew how to stay in, he knew how to stay composed against a guy of Morrison's nature. This wasn't his first rodeo. So kept himself composed and then decided, he punched through what Morrison was doing because he was wide open. And you saw it. The minute Morrison got dropped, he was like kind of bewildered a little bit. Those other two knockdowns, I don't know if they would have stopped it in other places without a three knockdown rule. Probably not because Morrison did get up rather quickly, but it would have only been a matter of time. Well, like he was still stunned, and he's not a guy that knew how to survive when he was hurt either. So
Yeah, he was kind of just one of those like put his gloves up and fall forward type of fucking
yeah, mhm,
yeah, not good at clinching, not good at surviving.
exactly.
Yeah.
And people were pissed that night. Everybody was angry. They're just like, why? Everything went up in smoke.
Screwed it up, dude. I mean, you know what I mean? That's a massive payday to screw up.
Absolutely. And that was just a list of like head scratching decisions Morrison would do, throughout his career and against better advice that people were trying to give him. Like that was just the worst one of them all because I don't think he would have beat Lewis. All right. If it comes in the grand scheme of things, even back in 93 or what was that? That was 93, right? When that fight was supposed to happen.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And but he had a better chance of it than when they end eventually, fought and he was already under the tutelage of Emmanuel Stewart. Because by that point, Lewis was more tuned in and he wasn't, he had a better jab and better footwork and he wasn't just leaning in. He wasn't easier to catch. Morrison at that point had a better chance of landing some shit on him and having it more of a firefight than what it was of just an absolute drubbing.
Definitely tragic career to some degree. Well, I mean, to a few degrees, but I mean, at the same time, like you said, we talked about him during an entire show, but a lot of it he brought on himself. A lot of it was the excess of the times and the kind of hard charging of the late 80s and early 90s, where everything was loud and big, including the fucking drugs and the steroids, both of which Tommy Morrison, partook in. So I mean, yeah, and that I'm sure those things contributed to his behavior and stuff like that too. But like they said on the documentary, I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but remember he had like two girlfriends of the same name that he used to
Mhm.
get mixed up like in the same fucking town and shit. I mean, dude, the guy was a fucking like he was wild.
Remember that T-shirt? There's one T-shirt I want more than anything of Morrison. I can't. It's like a woman's hand with like her fingernails or something like that. Like you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember. Like I haven't seen it in so long. I forgot exactly what it looks like, but it says like Tommy Morrison under it, and it's just
Yeah, like women were always like fucking reaching, trying to fucking get their hands on him and shit. Yeah.
what they were. I mean, he was a popular guy, and he was a good fighter too. He just was an absolute knucklehead.
Well, I mean, look at like pro wrestling, bro, and look at the kind of like fucking ravishing Rick Rude. The guy was like the most creepy looking porno star looking fucking guy, and there's like women in the audience.
Yeah,
"Ah," look at Tommy Morrison and his wacky fucking dumb mullet, and women were like swooning over his stupid ass mullet. You know what I mean? The
yeah.
fucking late '80s and early '90s were wild, bro. I don't
It
know what
was.
to tell you.
You got to watch that clip of Regis and Kathy Lee with Ravish and Rick Rude. It's kind of bad because it's really bad actually. They always had wrestlers on back then, and I guess Kathy Lee never liked it, and she just found them to be big meatheads and everything, which essentially they were. But
Good TV, but no, she ain't wrong.
Rude decided when they got on the show, he said he had a special treat for Kathy, and he took his robe off and he had the
Yeah, I
trunks
was
on.
gonna say I already know where this is going.
Yeah, he had the trunks on, and her face was spray painted on his crotch. Yeah.
That's
Instead of like another
fantastic.
yeah.
I'm sure she loved it
And he started doing the rude dance and everything like that. And she like was mortified, started running away. Like you see her face. And it wasn't that was legit. She was absolutely mortified, started running away. Rude started chasing her because that's what they do.
because that's just what they did at the time.
And everyone's cheering on and laughing. Reed just thinks it's the funniest thing. Bobby
Yeah, the
Heenan.
producers were probably like, "Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, this is what we want."
She freaked out. Her husband, I guess the NFL player Frank Gifford, wanted to fight Rude, which would have ended up very badly for Gifford.
I'm
And
sure it would have. Yeah, 'cause most of those motherfuckers could shoot.
yeah, and Rude was a bad, legit bad motherfucker himself. And yeah, it was just an absolute fiasco. But I just thought I had to bring that up when you mentioned Ravishing Rick Rude because,
Well, I'm just saying, like these dudes with like the awful porno stashes and terrible mullets, and women loved that shit. Not all women, but many, especially Midwestern white women, loved that shit at the time, bro. They
I'm
fucking loved it.
swooning, bro.
There's that photo that I have of fucking Tommy Morrison working out, and he's working out in a fucking sleeveless Debbie Gibson shirt, and I'm like, now that is 1989, like a motherfucker right there.
Absolutely. Man staying home to his roots all the time. Like that
Some,
photo he posted of him after he beat George Foreman. He's not at some glitzy ass place, not at, fancy
yeah,
restaurant, nightclub, nothing like that. He's literally looks like he's at his mom's house or something, drinking milk and eating a meal with his family.
yeah, he's eating like some barbecue or something.
Yeah, yeah, the same kitchen that they kind of grew up in.
Fucking A. Yeah, I mean, it looks, yeah, it's like that fucking like Harvest Gold fucking kitchen with the,
Yes.
looks awful. Yeah. Shag carpeting and the fucking,
Yep,
yeah.
yep, yep. Hmm.
No, that's a good call because, like I said, it's there's some icky stuff in there too, but he was definitely fell under the goofball fucking knucklehead umbrella. Sorry if this fool's being distracting, but he's a beautiful specimen. Speaking of beautiful specimens, think this next fighter that I got falls under the beautiful specimen umbrella himself, but also a goofball. And again, kind of bleeds into the icky story. Unfortunately, that's Hector Camacho.
Oh,
Uh,
I was thinking of bringing him up.
80s and 90s for sure. A lot of fiascos involved him. A lot of, he started out, I guess one of the things that he had said he had started doing before he found his way into a boxing gym was he used to steal cars. He's a small guy. He's like, yeah, at the time, like 115 pounds, soaking wet, not a very large dude, and started getting into trouble on the streets and shit like that. And you can imagine the way that he moved in the ring. Can you imagine like watching some fucking fool from around the way trying to fight him in the street? That would have been some wild shit for sure. But in any case, yeah, like that was kind of his entire persona was being goofy, wacky, outlandish, doing something that you didn't think he was going to do. Or, they'll say, hey, pose. And instead of posing, he'd fucking be sitting there dancing or something like that, wearing wild outfits. And of course, the various crazy interviews.
I mean, Camacho was a personality, bro. He was one of the first guys I discovered as a kid watching him grow up. You know what I mean? Because when I became a fan in the early 90s, I think the first fight I saw him of was against Chavez. I just loved his personality and all that, even though he got his ass kicked in that fight. Um, and there was always that tag with him too back then. Oh, he was always safety first and this and that and blah blah blah. But like when Camacho first came on the scene, so like he turns pro after a very good amateur career too. Like multi-time New York Golden Gloves champion and stuff like that. Like he was a dynamo, and he turns pro in 1980, and right away, like the style that he had was something like people had not seen in years. Like he was absolutely brilliant. You know what I mean? Like it was the fastest thing, he was just lightning, absolute lightning in a bottle. Like he had the blurring fast hand speed. His footwork was impeccable. He couldn't really touch him, and he had good power, and he wasn't afraid. Like he was just blowing guys out. He wasn't afraid to take these dudes out. He was just knocking the shit out of people left and right, and doing it in like very flashy style, like you said. Like he just had that whole look. He was over the top. He was very boisterous. He talked a lot of shit. Had that already started having the curl going on. Very just that whole persona of like the grittiness of the 70s and 80s New York was personified in Camacho, but he took it with like another like sense of like glitz and glamour too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. Because especially when he first started out, dude, there's a lot of those photos of like his outfits from back in the day, and all this shit looked like members only fucking shit. Like he was
Absolutely.
he totally was buying into the times. Like his shtick and his act like evolved with the times.
And he just, he when he came up on the scene back in the day, he wasn't coddled. If you look at his record, a lot of these guys don't have like, some of his early opponents, you're like, whatever. But then you see a guy like Louis Loy, who was a really good fighter back then. It was undefeated when Camacho beat him. Melvin Paul was another one who I think went on to fight for a world championship. Rafael Lopez, Blaine Dickinson. Those are good names that he had on his record. And he was beating these guys rather convincingly, some by decision, some by knockout. And by the time he fights Bazooka Limon in 1983 for the vacant WBC Super Featherweight Championship, Camacho is ready. You know what I mean? Like this is a big opportunity for him. And not only that, um, he Limon is a little past it. You know what I mean? Like he's been through the ringer at this point. He's already gone through all of his fights with Bobby Chacon, which especially their fourth fight's one of the greatest fights of all time, if not the. And he's been through everybody else you can imagine. Like this guy, he went through the round robin of all those from the late 70s, early 80s. And he's a little withered because clearly he's that type of style just doesn't last long. So he's there for the taking. But the way Camacho took him out in that fight was just pure brilliance, man. Like he just blasted him. It wasn't competitive. There was nothing with it. Like he just, there's the highlight films of it where Lamone doesn't know what the hell happened. Like it's like death by a thousand fists. Everywhere he looks, he's just kind of like bewildered, like, well, I don't know where this is coming from. And it kind of like reminds you of Jesus. Like the movie Medium Man or something like that. Robert Townsend becomes the Medium Man, then he starts going around in the blur, doing these things, and you see like the whole visual of a fist coming in different directions while it's a tornado going around. That's what Lamone must have felt like with Camacho.
Yeah, it was like that wild combination that Ray Leonard threw against Tommy Hearns, where he did it for like
Yeah.
6 seconds but threw like 70 punches and was like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
fucking crazy. And hey, dude, Lamone still had enough left to fucking pants Sharmba Mitchell a couple years later, mid
That's
fight.
so I mean, yeah.
I think he did that twice
Hold it.
too.
That
Like he
was
did it the
ridiculous.
first time and kind of sort of pulled him down, and then the ref was like, "Bro, what the fuck you doing? All right, come on, fight." And then he goes over and just goes yoink and fucking pulls his fucking trunks down.
All the way too. It was hysterical.
That was fucking Bazooka Limon. Yeah, dude, and God, that was fucking 90 something. But to think that as far back as Bazooka Limon's fucking career went too. I mean, I know we weren't talking about him necessarily, but the dude had an underrated fucking entertaining fucking career there, bro. Like for all the fighters that he took on.
And he should be on the Hall of Fame ballot when you think about it, considering that type of record and who he fought and who he won against and didn't and all that. I mean, put his record against others and is definitely worthy, but that's never going to happen. That's a discussion for another time.
Exactly. Yeah.
But like,
Some of those losses I weigh heavier than some of the wins against the dudes who fucking got in. But
sure,
anyway.
and he's still alive. So I mean, but Camacho only made one defense and then he moves up to lightweight. And when he fought Jose Luis Ramirez, that was probably his most brilliant fight when you think about it. Ramirez, we talked about on the show, not a hell of a fighter, just a dude who was a rugged guy, gave everybody hell who he fought, if not beat them,
Yeah,
and
does not get the credit he deserves.
definitely does not. You know what I mean? Kind of forgotten today, and that's unfortunate because there's been so many legendary fighters from that era. But like, there's two fights with Rosario. You know, the he almost beats Arguello, gave him a hell of a fight. Like, finished off Cornelia Boza Edwards' career, like stacking a bunch of other wins in between. Great fighter, but Camacho put in like his most brilliant performance there. Ramirez couldn't do shit with him, got dropped, got slapped up. Like, it looked like Camacho was going to be pound for pound the best. It got to the point where people were like Michael Katz, who was a prominent writer on the East Coast at that point, one of the best in but one of the top boxing writers in the world, I guess, right, in terms of being known. Um, put out the word saying that Camacho was the next Sugar Ray Robinson. High praise, but the way he was looking, I can almost see people kind of like jumping on that train. And all it took though was a couple of fights later where he ends up, his kryptonite.
Well, and a lot of people thought that the Edwin Rosario fight, dude, just
That's what I was getting to. Yeah.
yeah, the Edwin Rosario fight, that's what the kind of I think it's accurate too, but like the kind of the common uh tale or whatever was that Hector Camacho ran into Edwin Rosario, who was a heavy puncher, just a hard fighter, just a guy who, generally speaking, obviously he had his own kryptonite, but generally speaking, he was a guy who was just a pain in the ass to fight, and a guy that if you came in underprepared or without a plan B or potentially C, he might zap your ass. And that's
Yeah.
pretty much exactly what happened was that, Hector Camacho got zapped pretty good. And it seemed as though like it scared him into fighting a far less offensive style where he was more just kind of points, avoiding defense, peck, peck, peck type of shit. I mean, I think there is kind of some truth to that.
It's true. I mean, it's a lot of truth that that was the fight that changed him because he was still a sharpshooter and doing what he was gonna do before that. And then like he had never been hit like that before. I mean, Rosario had life-changing power, bro. If he hit you on the chin, like he could take your ass out. Look what he did to Livingston Bramble. Like Bramble at that point was known as a rock solid guy who
Yeah,
would
he
never
was tricky. He knew a lot, every trick in the book.
anything like that. And Rosario just grounded him into like just the way he just definitively dropped him in round two. And Bramble just stood there on all fours, utterly broken, was the type of power Rosario, wielded. That was one punch knockout power. And Camacho got caught and he got caught really bad. I mean, Camacho had a great chin. We got to give him credit for that. All time great chin, but like he got hurt in that fight badly. And that just altered his career because he realized he never wanted to be hurt like that again. Like it just, and he knew that he had the legs to make sure that wasn't going to happen. So
Exactly.
he used that to his advantage that he could sell out box guys, but he wasn't going to take the risks involved to potentially get beat up and marked up if it wasn't necessary. And it showed, when he fought Boza Edwards in his next fight, he looked like shit. Boza Edwards couldn't keep up with him, just chased him around for 12 rounds, and it was a rather boring fight. And not only that, now like Camacho, his out of the ring antics are starting to pick up too. We're starting to hear more about him getting arrested for this and that, domestic issue, cocaine, this or drugs or alcohol, speeding, and just random things that you like stories. They'd be like, wait, what? He gets pulled over and he finds out that he was having sex while he was driving on the freeway or something like that, or like
Yeah, I remember when he
you
did that interview.
yeah, yeah, he said he was doing the wild thing, right?
Yeah.
He had other instances where he was just going wild and doing things, and I mean, it started getting to the point where his outside the ring antics were starting to like become more prominent than anything he was doing inside the ring. And still with all that happening, he somehow was still able to remain undefeated throughout the 80s. Like he didn't really fight as frequently as the 80s went on, eventually gave up the WBC belt. Fights a few times, and like I think he fights one time in 87, fights a couple of times in 88, and nothing really inspiring there. And then he fights Ray Mancini, who's coming out of retirement specifically to fight him. And that fight too, Camacho almost loses that. You know what I mean? Mancini's old, he's washed, he's definitely a little rusty from what he was, but Camacho is so safety first that Mancini just chases him around the ring the whole time. And Camacho barely does enough offense that he almost loses it. And that became a running thing. So by the time he loses to Greg Haugen in what was it, 1991 or so, it's like at that point, even though he's been undefeated, he's still one of the top guys out there, I guess, in terms of star power. But like you would almost think he's underachieved considering what he could have accomplished.
Well, yeah. And like you said, I think that in the inactivity, because a lot of the shit that he was doing outside the ring was not helpful in that regard, because that was the time that was basically his physical prime, where
Yeah.
he should have been, building his legacy and fighting more often or whatever, or trying to clean out divisions. And instead, he wound up going up to 140 pounds instead of being able to stay at 135. And part of that might have been that he just outgrew it or whatever, but he wasn't a massive lightweight either. So it was like, I kind of got the feeling that at least part of that was the outside the ring shit. But and on top of that, I can't remember what it was, but he was on some show around this time too. So he had like, dude, he was a legit celebrity because you brought up earlier that you remembered him from your childhood. I remember too because I remember I brought this up before that when I was super little, my brother and I used to be able to get video games if we were really good or if we had like a an A or in a particular class or something like that in school. And my brother got some game and I got fucking Mike Tyson's Punch Out. And so, it stuck with me because there was fucking Macho Man Randy Savage. There was Hector Macho Camacho, and then there was obviously fucking Macho Man on the video game. And so I don't know why, but those things like stuck, like they connected
Uh,
in my head. And so I remember being like, oh, there's a fucking, Macho Camacho. I'm just like the guy in the video game. And so I remember him from being a kid too. But when he started getting into trouble and when he started kind of like his activities started waning, it was right around the time that he was a big celebrity. And that seems to happen for a lot of fighters. Their celebrity rises, they don't fight as much. They're relying on other sources of income, et cetera, et cetera. So that seems kind of like what had happened with Camacho. But when he moved up to 140, wasn't the same kind of fighter, was obviously still very effective, but Greg Haugen had his own drawbacks as a fighter, and he managed to basically, just like you said, a big problem with Camacho, inactivity in the ring too. Not just, how many times he fought, but when he'd get in the ring, he wasn't doing enough offensively quite a bit and moved around way too much. And that's pretty much what happened was Greg Haugen just outworked him in a number of rounds. Like he didn't do anything special, just outworked him.
and then Camacho, because he's a dumbass, in the last round, um, I think he either refused to touch gloves or he took a swipe at Haugen or something, and the referee deducted a point from him for doing that. And
Yeah,
that's
they
what
were
lost
they
the
were
fight.
both kind of going back and forth, going like, no, 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 that type of shit. And
Yeah, he refused to touch gloves with them at the 12th and final. I've never heard of a point being deducted because you refused to touch gloves at the 12th and final round, but
they were both like, it was really strange because they were like both like, no, and the ref just turned to Camacho and was like, yeah, and chose him for some. It was really weird.
and that to Haugen's credit, he did say that he wanted to get in Camacho's head and he knew he could during that fight. And he, running his mouth and
He
all
kind
that.
of did.
So, you gotta do that sometimes. I mean, Duran did it with Leonard. You know what I mean? Like you gotta play mind games with these guys and fuck with them enough that they're gonna stand there and fight the fight that you want them to fight. So, but yeah, the thing about Camacho and a guy like Michael Nunn, for instance, right? Like Nunn at one point was considered one of the top pound for pound fighters of the world, and then he got really safety first and all of that, and people started just not giving a shit about him. Is that Nunn didn't have the personality? I mean, he was a personable guy, but he did not have the
Yeah, yeah. That's why
personality.
the Callum Bay knockout was so shocking because people were like, "Oh, you have that in you? What?"
Exactly. And then he starts putting on stinkers after that, but it's like he didn't have the appeal of Camacho of just like that, what he was into, like the over the topness, with his outfits and this and that and all this other shit going on. So they were just they just kind of forgot about a guy like Camacho. That's what kept him in the limelight, even throughout the 90s, because after he loses, he fights Haugen, then beats him in a rematch and stuff like that. Like his career was just kind of meh. By the time he fights Chavez, that was a big fight still. All right. It's in 1992. And I remember this is the infancy of my fandom. So I didn't really know much about either guy, but my dad, I know, was excited about the fight.
Mexico versus
That's what I
Puerto
kind of
Rico.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of remember was that he was excited. I don't ever recall. I don't think I watched it live. I'm sure he went to my uncle's house or something. Regardless, Camacho got his ass kicked in that fight. That was not a good showing at all whatsoever. Chavez beat him from
No, it was
pillar.
like embarrassing.
Yeah, it was really,
It's
really
like a
embarrassing.
career turning.
Totally. And I think everyone at that point really had given up on Camacho because like that was that was almost like a Broner performance. You know what I mean? Like a dude who had all that talent, but then he just goes in there for that fight against a superstar. I mean, a Chavez, but like he just got thoroughly his ass kicked. He was brave. He took it. He never got dropped, and he took a beating, but he never threatened whatsoever. Didn't do anything. Was on the back foot the whole time, and just got whooped. But a guy like Camacho at this point now, by the late 80s, he was having like inactivity issues. Now he's trying to be active. Now he's being active. And he fights a few more times and all that. And he still is able to land a big fight here and there. Like remember when he fought Felix Trinidad on the undercard of Frankie Randall Chavez won. And I wouldn't say that was a big, big fight, but in today's day, they would probably make that a pay-per-view main event. It's not how the market is. But back then, that was just an undercard. That was the main undercard attraction. Trinidad was still a young champion, and Camacho was like the wily veteran who was saying, "Okay, I'm going to go back to my old roots before the fight and do X, Y, and Z." Instead, ran around and did absolutely nothing. But at that point, it was like guys like him, Paz, once he came back from his accident, Duran, a little bit older than those guys, but on the same type of scheme, and others would just go on the circuit. Now they have Tuesday night fights, they have ESPN, they have a bunch of promoters who are willing to put them in, like in Mississippi and other places, just to beat the shit out of these local guys. and eventually get another big fight out of it.
And you know what, dude? It actually worked though too,
Yeah,
because Camacho then all of a sudden it was like he got a fucking bug up his ass, and all of a sudden it was like he fucking fought like 30 times in like 2 years or something, like something crazy. But I mean, the vast majority of them, it was like, look, he's going in Corpus Christi, Moline, Fort
yeah,
Lauderdale,
yeah,
Chester. I mean, like he's just fucking all over the place, and it's most of them are like kind of third and fourth rate contender type of,
yeah.
Craig Houck. And, no
Oh, our
offense.
favorite. I love Craig
No
Houck.
offense. Yeah, no, I'm not trying. I'm just saying, but
Oh
like,
no, no, I say that in a funny way. Craig Houck's an interesting man, but
he's a character. But
yeah,
in any a lot of dudes with weird haircuts and shit. So in any case, yeah,
he's
he's kind of
gone.
he's built himself back up, and he's kind of like, working his way toward at least name fights. But the name fights are Roberto, the 1996 version of Roberto Duran, who's, just not a viable fighter really anymore, and even so wound up taking some rounds from Camacho.
He
But
should have
like,
won that fight. I haven't watched this since it happened, but by all accounts, I think Duran beat him, didn't he?
it was pretty fucking
Yeah.
close fight, dude. It was like a, could have gone 7-5 either way type of fight. I mean, which is not, that's not saying a lot, because around 1996, Duran had already kind of like blown up in weight and then had already lost all the weight type of thing. You know what I mean? He didn't look
Yeah.
super good physically, etc. And but then the fucking Ray Leonard was on his umpteenth comeback, and he kept, announcing it. And this was his next announced comeback, and Hector Camacho had somehow worked. I don't know how that fight even came to be, honestly, but I do know that part of it was that during a post-fight interview for one of his fights, Hector Camacho used the N-word, and that Ray Leonard had spoken out in, I think it was Jet magazine, and had basically said like, I'm gonna kick his ass. I'm gonna come back and kick his ass for doing that, and he better apologize. And I'm gonna make him apologize. And obviously, we know that didn't
Yeah.
wound up happening at all.
That was such a weird time, that Leonard comeback in 1997. Because if you were reading the magazines and reading newspapers, and well, that's all we really could do back then because the internet was in its infancy. Um, Camacho, like Leonard was supposed to fight a number of guys. At one point, he was going to come back and fight Pernell Whitaker. That was going to be his first fight right back was Whitaker. That was all set up, and then somehow some money issue came up and that fell apart. Leonard was going to fight Vinny Paz at one point. Leonard was looked upon at. There was a lot of different guys. Somehow they finally landed on Camacho. All right. And that seemed like a safe enough bet because, like you said, like we just said, Camacho was on the circuit beating up second raters and other stuff and past their prime guys and whatever may be and outpost in different spots. But like he still just looked like, feather fisted Camacho, a little bit heavier now because now he's like closer to middleweight and everything. But like, what is he gonna do? You know what I mean? Like this seems like if Leonard's gonna be able to come back and now he's claiming he's not injured like he was when he fought Terry Norris and he's at a better weight and yada yada yada, then this seems like a safe bet for him. So I mean, Camacho ravaged him, made him look like, the Camacho of old, even though he was slower, pudgier, and everything. Leonard had absolutely nothing. And got bludgeoned. And of course, because of that, that got Camacho another coveted spot on pay-per-view against the biggest star in boxing, Oscar De La Hoya. But it took him a
Yeah,
number of months actually to get to that fight. You know what I mean? You have to think about that. But it was like just no, it didn't. They fought. Yeah, that was his immediate next fight. And like, remember when that was a pay? Even me as a kid, I was like, how is this even gonna be like how viable? Like, no one wants to watch this. It wasn't gonna be a fight that people were gonna be excited about.
especially in 97, dude, because it was like there was a legit welterweight division at that point. And it was like, why are you fighting Hector Camacho, dude? But it was because he had banked off of beating Ray Leonard and, kicking the crap out of him. Ray looked awful. He looked so washed, bro.
It was bad. And the fact that he gets to come out, I remember that the fight was so like meh that I don't think I really missed a pay-per-view show at that point, but our black box wasn't working or whatever for some reason. And we went to go watch it at somebody else's house and they couldn't get it either. I don't know. I think I blamed it on Bob Aaron. He's probably trying to do closed circuit again.
I was gonna say, it's funny you mentioned that, dude, because I was just probably like 3 or 4 days ago
Yeah.
reading about how Bob Arum, right around this time, he had started threatening the cable companies because he had said they weren't doing enough to clamp down on black box,
Yeah.
like illegal black box fucking broadcasts, and that was losing them money on pay-per-views. And around the time that was when De La Hoya was they were trying to pump up De La Hoya as the star and shit like that. So I mean, yeah, it's funny you say that because he was making a big thing of it. He was going to start suing everybody. Nothing happened.
But honestly, I didn't give a shit about missing it because I knew it was gonna be, foregone conclusion.
Yeah, he
But
got washed.
yeah, that was his last big fight. Of course, like we said, he still kept on fighting over the years. You know what I mean? Um, he had that one time on HBO where him and his kid, another knucklehead himself, um, Macho Jr. fought on KO Nation. I think at like 11:30 p.m. or midnight or some weird ass time. But like, yeah, at the end of the day, though, man, it's tragic what ended up happening to him because a guy like Camacho is the type of personality that deserved. Uh, I don't know if he ever would have had a peaceful retirement. I don't think a person like them could have just like rode off to the sunset, just sitting on his porch or some shit. But like, he was the type of personality that he would have been a very good president still today. You know how like Durant and other guys are always sometimes they try to place them at press conferences or whatever. Camacho would have been great for that today. You know what I mean? Still loud, still boisterous, showing up random places, being talking about how he's still the macho man and doing X, Y, and Z. And it's a tragic ending, the way he ended up there in a car with someone who was the intended target. He wasn't. And yeah,
And regardless of how you feel about him, you might not have been a fan. You might have been like, ah, I'm not really a fan of like fighters who are movers or fighters who are defensive fighters, or perhaps you're not a fan of that kind of fight. Whatever. I don't know. Maybe you're not a fan. But point is, even if you're not a fan, I think that you can still acknowledge that he contributed a lot to boxing in the 80s and 90s, and he was a legitimate star, and he had a shitload of potential. Not one of the top Puerto Rican fighters, in my opinion. At least, I mean, not like the top handful or whatever, but still a great fighter, no question.
absolutely. And he still was one of my favorites. Like I loved watching him growing up. He was a great personality. I loved his outfits. We've discussed that, like which ones were our favorite ones and stuff like that. Um, I loved his military outfit, the one that had like macho on the cap on top that he had painted on there. That was a really good one. His fireman outfit was pretty dope. The
That's going to be our next not that's going to be our next show that is not like drawn from content. We're going to be doing like the wildest outfits or whatever, or ring walks or something. That's what we're going to
Absolutely. So I mean, it was just great. Like
do.
he was one of those guys that you can't forget him, and especially from a time period when you remember him fondly and watched him fight live, whether it was during his championship heyday or like during his time making the circuit on Tuesday night fights and other stuff. He was that dude. So
For sure. And he definitely, like I said, goofy guy, funny
yep,
guy, and it sucks the way that he went out because he deserved to be recognized for contributing. But who else we
absolutely.
got? What other kind of
A
dumbassery we
knucklehead.
got?
Well, it's another lightweight champion, but it's the one from the 1940s. And out of all those dudes from that era, I mean, a lot of those guys were definitely not living Spartan lifestyles back then and kind of burning both of the bridges, but I don't think anyone did it more than Lou Jenkins,
That's a good one. Yeah,
right?
that's a
Yeah.
good one. That's true. Yeah, the Sweetwater Swatter.
Yeah. Who a guy who said, and I just had to remind myself, he said that his two toughest opponents were Jack Daniels and Harley Davidson.
There's a number of really great photos of him that like he just seems like a gritty dude. And then of course the way that he won the
Uh-huh.
lightweight championship.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, the way that he won the lightweight championship, knocking out Lou Ambers, who himself was a really tough guy with a tough, busy style. And I mean, that was kind of the perception, was that like Lou Jenkins was almost like an Al Bummy Davis type, where he was like, not a very good fighter, but could just fucking hit. And
Oh, absolutely.
that was the perception. And I think it was probably kind of true. Not to say that he was unskilled, but you know what I'm saying.
No, he was one of those guys that like he came up. So I got his book right here. I just had to bring it up. My all-time favorite book in this
Yeah,
corner.
it's a great photo or a great book.
Yeah, and this is and the Jenkins interview, getting it from him is probably one of the rare ones because it's not a guy I can see that was like really talked about a lot over the years and kind of, after his career wound down, he did have a military career
Hmm.
that was really big and he was
Yeah.
proud of. But other than that, like he kind of fell out the limelight.
It
So
wasn't he like I don't remember. I don't know. Remember if he was in the army or the Marines, but I'm pretty sure like he like saw like action though. Like he wasn't like fighting exhibitions. Like I'm pretty sure he was like doing
oh
some
no,
shit.
no, he was like fully in action,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so let's see over here. Yeah, 1941, he suffered a neck injury in a motorcycle accident. He was constantly drinking and doing other stuff, and his career was winding down because he was getting whooped by everybody because he was just walking into the ring pissed drunk all the time. You know what I mean? That was the thing about him being a knucklehead is that like he was a hell of a, like you said, a vicious, vicious puncher to the point where by the time when he was first coming up in 1939, he won 13 times. He lost to Willie Joyce, but his knockout wins were over Primo Flores, Mike Belois, who was a former champion, Billy Marquette, and then he scored a first round KO over Tippy Larkin, which is a big win. Larkin was a future champion himself. But when he knocked out Lou Ambers, that was massive because Ambers was that type of guy that like the lightweight champion from the in the mid to late 30s, you know what I mean? And a dude who survived Armstrong. He lost his title to Armstrong in their first fight, but then like in their rematch again, had to go through ridiculous punishment, but was able to regain it. Had beaten Pedro Montanez, who was a streaking hell of a really, really popular
That was a
fighter from
wild
Puerto Rico.
division, bro.
Yeah, like really, really, super deep back then. Beat Tony Canzoneri for the belt. Canzoneri was already old at that point and beat Ambers.
Yeah, he was definitely at the end, but still,
So to beat him for the title was a massive win. And then he also who else did he lose to by decision? He lost to uh Jimmy McLaren. No scrub in that one either. But I mean, like he had a host of like big wins, like Ambers was that guy. And had never been stopped either. He had gone the distance and everything like that. So when he fought Lou Jenkins and Jenkins blasted him in 3 rounds nonetheless, like really knocked his ass out, it was kind of like an eye opener. People like, holy shit, like this was like that type of power you don't expect. You know what I mean? Like that's clear one punch knockout power. A guy that's not really skilled, you're not going to teach him how to do the fundamentals of sitting there and like doing a classic 1-2 or nothing, but you let him wing him and he hits you, well, your ass is going out.
I mean, you just go through like, and you're literally just like scrolling through, like Lou Amber's. Uh, I mean, just to give you an idea of the division, not necessarily even his record per se, but just of what was going on in the lightweight division during the 1930s. You know what I'm saying? Like you got, I mean, God, dude. I mean, a number of these fighters are just fucking like fighters who are like not that recognizable, but the division was so deep. Coco Kid, all right, extremely recognizable fighter, obviously. Coco Kid, Jimmy Leto, Mickey Paul, and that was one of like the kind of third raters guy, Harry Dublinsky, Sammy Fuller, Canzoneri, Fritzy Zivic, Frankie Click, Baby Arismendi, Jackie Sharkey, the dude who took his name from Jack Sharkey, McLarnin, Venturi, Davy Day, Pedro Montañez, like you said, Phil Baker, who was more of a kind of a journeyman type who would give you rounds and was a pain in the ass. Howard Scott, super experienced guy. Dude, I mean, the division was extremely deep and it was a tough division. And that was why the title was kind of being hot potatoed around for a few years because it was tough to be a dominant champion during a freaking division like this. And even Henry Armstrong wasn't really even that long for the title, as great as he was during this division. I mean, he was more known for holding the multiple titles than necessarily dominating per se. And he was more of a welterweight by that time anyway because he didn't want to make featherweight and lightweight anymore for much longer. So I mean, dude, the division was a nightmare.
Sure. Well, here's the thing about you. I need to find something about him being like some knucklehead shit, right? And so in his interview with uh with Peter Heller, he goes over. I love this quote right here. I went over and fought in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania one time. I got into a brawl, drunk about a week before the fight. I had 16 stitches in my hand when I got cut on a beer bottle. I fought. I couldn't even hold my arm down. I was drunk, paralyzed drunk. I fell flat on my face getting into the ring. The referee had to come over and drag me over to the corner and put me on the stool. I butted the guy in the eighth round and they stopped the fight and gave it to the other guy. I went in the dressing room, was fixing to get in the shower, and they called me back and started the fight over again in the eighth round. Continued to make it to the 10th, continued it to make the 10 rounds. I was drunker than hell. I had a quart of whiskey in my corner in the water bucket. I couldn't even get the tape over my hand. That's the way I was fighting all my life. I never had an even break with the other guy.
He definitely comes across as one of those fighters who basically would have and potentially could have gone a lot farther and had a totally different career had he not taken a ton of fights like last minute or gone into fights injured and shit like that, or just fought wherever. Like, he was one of those guys who would travel too. And I mean, there are countless fighters like that where you wonder what would have happened had they had money backing them, like so and so or so and so.
Well, absolutely, man. And he was just one of those dudes that he made for fun fights, and he was in that type of division where either when he lost, which he did quite often, especially as champion. Once he became champ, I think he went off the rails because that's when you start making the money and you recognize and all that, and his career started hitting the skids. And back then in the 40s, boxing was different, clearly in the sense that like champions fought other champions still. They would move up and weight and just fight non-title fights. The money was there and it was a big event for MSG or wherever it was going to be at. Those fights would be made. Armstrong did that all the time. He beat the hell out of guys like Lou Jenkins and others while still while they were champions moving up to fight. Fighting Freddie Red Cochran, welterweight champion, other guys like that. Like that was just a normal occurrence. And for a guy like Jenkins who was burning both ends of the bridges the way he was literally, um, smoke heavy chain smoker, drinking all the time, to getting into motorcycle accidents and car accidents where he's actually breaking his neck and other body parts, not getting arrested, and going right back in the ring with guys like Bob Montgomery and others is insanity. Absolute insanity.
Yeah, it's crazy, dude. It was a wild era, and on top of that, with the entire backdrop of a war or a potential war, Jesus, dude. Yeah, and it's actually you and I have brought up that book a number of different times, and I'm thankful that we have that book, dude, because that's exactly the generation of fighters that we need to be hearing from.
It's true. And this guy said too, like, Peter Heller said after he wrote this book, he said that this book would never be possible in another 20 years. And it's true because everybody that was interviewed in this book, besides Duran, has since passed on. Every single one, you know. So it's shows you right there. It's really sad. But like you have those guys, you had Jenkins talking about that, and you mentioned him being a war hero. And it said at the end of it right here, by the time his career had ended, Lou Jenkins had hit rock bottom as a person. He had been divorced, his money was gone, and he wasn't much of a family man to his new wife and baby son. He re-enlisted in the army, and there he found himself. He was decorated for gallantry after his actions in the fire, were credited while saving the lives of many of his fellow soldiers when they were cut off behind enemy lines during the Korean War. Lou made the Army a career, retiring as a first sergeant in 1963.
And well, and it's crazy to think that that was basically after a
His
bunch
career,
of a
yeah.
bunch of what had happened during his career.
And that's where he found himself. That's where he found inner peace, is serving in the war and fighting, and fighting front line. That's crazy.
I mean, yeah, dude, I don't know.
I love
It's
that era. That era is so like it's fascinating in the sense that yes, there was a lot of corruption going on with Jim Norris and the IBC and all this bullshit happening in the 40s and 50s and all that. But like what, incredible fighters you had back then. Even with Jacobs Beach when they were getting infiltrated too. So like you have to talk about the 30s, 40s up until then. But it's like, yeah.
Yeah, dude. It's I know that it's like one of those stereotypes and I try to actively push back against some of them sometimes where people are like, "Oh, back when men were men," which I don't even know what the fuck that means. First of all, I hate that phrase. That's the dumbest shit that anybody ever says.
Well,
But
clearly you're
none
not manly enough then, bro.
God, it just makes my skin crawl when people say things like that. But nonetheless, it is okay to acknowledge, though, that shit was for a lot of people, a lot of regular ass people, tough, really tough. And that when you come from a place where the vast majority of people are tough because they grew up tough and had fucked up situations, you know, when either financially or constantly stressed out that somebody's gonna like bomb your fucking country. I don't mean to laugh like that's funny, but my point is that it produces a different kind of person, and we can see that. You know, we view that because we're boxing and history fans. We can see that in the history, you know, and it's fucking crazy.
But yeah. But yeah, Lou Jenkins I thought would be a good subject for this.
Let's see. I think we got time for one, maybe two more if I make this quick. So let me go ahead and squeeze one in there. Also somewhat recent, but a little twinge of nostalgia nonetheless, because there's a handful of pretty good things to talk about. Also culminating in some weird, almost way more tragic than it could have been shit, and that's Riddick Bowe.
Mm. Oh boy. Yeah.
Always a good time with Riddick Bowe fight. I mean, dude, you know, we've talked about this on the show many times about 1990s heavyweight boxing. There was just something about it that steroids, uh, flying fucking shit into the ring, bites, tackles,
Murder.
throws, murder, fucking yeah, promoters who weren't actually promoters sailing in and
Yes.
I mean, dude, there was just something about late 1980s, early 1990s boxing that was so wild, and Riddick Bowe seemed to be involved in a lot of it, a suspicious amount of it.
And not so much because he was an instigator.
Some of it,
Sometimes he did.
yeah,
Couple,
but it did
yeah,
follow
yeah. I
him
mean,
too.
like the Elijah Tillery thing definitely was a little suspect. And thing is that Bo,
Yeah,
the thing about Bo was that
why didn't he get in more trouble for that? Because he kind of started that whole thing. I'm
he
sorry.
did. He swung. All right, they start. If I remember correctly, they start talking shit to each other after the first round. Right, they start jabbering it, and then Bo takes a swing at him, which Tillery
Yeah.
retaliates with a kick. Bo swings again. Tillery kicks him again. They're not even good kicks either.
If he would have just punched instead of kicked, I think he would have been all right. It was the kick that did it. It was the
Yeah.
kick that fucked him up.
And not only that, they weren't even good kicks. I mean, like we weren't receiving them, but they didn't look like they were strong or even
Yeah,
really low
that
that
was
time.
like
They
a
looked
I'm
awkward.
not really trying to kick you kick.
Yeah, they just look awkward and kind of gorky. They were I don't know how to explain it, but like he tried kicking him twice, and then that didn't really work. And then all of a sudden, Rock Dooman's little stupid ass comes over the ring and just grabs him and pulls him out there. And rest of Bo's, entourage tried to jump on him too, but Tillery got out of there. But like there was always, Bo was a good guy at heart. Like when you talk to him, he had a good personality. He was, he was funny and like you knew his background and like when you heard the stories of how he would like walk his mom home every day or walk her to the bus or whatever in Brownsville in a really dangerous neighborhood and all that made you feel like, heartwarming, right? Like you wanted to root for him. But like you said, there was always just some weird shit happening to him. Like after the Olympics where he gets stopped by Lennox Lewis, turns pro, and initially Eddie Futch didn't want to work with him because Futch had heard that he was kind of a lazy dude and and knew some stuff about like the people he hung with and whatever. And a guy like Futch, especially at that age, was not a person that was gonna fuck around and just work with anybody for the sake of working with him. Like, he knew his time was valuable to him and he was only gonna impart knowledge on people who deserved it. Bo, to his credit, showed him that he could work and stuff like that. And those two developed like a really good relationship because Bo was an incredible heavyweight, man. Like his prime did not last long at all whatsoever. In fact, it was over in the blink of an eye. But in that blink, man, he was brilliant. Like him coming up, he wasn't coddled.
One of
He
the
was
best
fighting.
heavyweights we've ever seen, just in terms of the eye test. Yeah, no
Yes,
question.
yeah, no question, man. Like he, when he was coming up, he wasn't coddled. He was fighting some really tough guys. You know what I mean? Like, and a couple of them, you can almost think that, hey, you might have lost that. Like Tony Tubbs, who was still a very serviceable fighter in the early 90s, gave Bo all he could handle. But that was a learning experience. Instead of people saying today, oh, he's a bum, he didn't take Tubbs out, nothing. People were like, no, he needed that. That was good for him, that's going to service him well on his way to whatever. Pierre Cotsar, and I don't have his record up, like other guys that he fought from that time, like other former champions and stuff. But like he was building, fighting a good collection of what a lot of guys were fighting back then, right? From the late 80s and early 90s in terms of like journeymen, gatekeepers, former champions, yada, yada, yada. So by the time he fights Holyfield in that first fight, like that was. I mean, he put it all together. That was the most brilliant. That's what people said, like you just said about the eye test. That was a brilliant performance. Absolutely brilliant performance. He outboxed Holyfield from the outside. When they got on the inside, he showed that he could fight on the inside better than Holyfield could. I mean, like that was one of the best big man inside fights ever. Like he just ripping uppercuts and body punches and everything. Like, man, he was brilliant. And he showed it too when what round was it? Where he had Holyfield reeling, right? And then Holyfield came back because, Holyfield has that remarkable recovery, came back, started beating Bo from pillar to post. And the way Bo took that beating, a lot of guys wouldn't be able to survive that themselves either. They would have just been stopped and they would have
Was
been
it
like,
like round 10, I think?
yeah, round nine, round 10, one of those rounds. Yeah, I think round 10. And like Bo beats him up and then Holyfield came back and almost stopped him. And that, after Bo becomes champion, because he won, he drops Holyfield the next round and won a clear decision. It looked like that was going to be it. But then this is where we talk about the knucklehead behavior. Not so much him, but like his whole team enabling it. Instead of him getting ready and like he has a Gibby defense against Ferguson, another one against Michael Dokes. In between all that, what is he doing? He ain't training. He's out there eating stuff like that. Rock Newman decides wants to make Bo a Muhammad Ali type ambassador and makes him go on a world tour, which was panned by everybody, saying, "Why are you doing this?" And so, like, remember that you'd see Bo in Somalia. You see Bo here, you see Bo there, like, doing all these different things, and he's doing all this goodwill stuff, which looks good on television, looks good on paper, and good for his image, but it's not good for him as a fighter, especially one who was as undisciplined as Bo was. My man liked to eat. He admitted it as much. If you put a piece of cake in front of him, he wasn't going to eat that slice. He was going to eat that whole cake. Like, and there were clips too. I remember specifically Rock Newman going, "Oh, yeah, Riddick wants to get KFC, so here we go." Why are you going to KFC as the heavyweight champion, man? Like, you should not be doing that. And this dude was getting buckets of shit and like other food and snacks and just indulging. So, of course, by the time the Holyfield rematch comes up, Holyfield now switches trainers. He goes to Emmanuel Stewart, who was like, "Bro, you need to, you need to." I guess Stewart said he saw Holyfield dancing one time, and he saw the way Holyfield can move and using his legs, and obviously being a strong guy. Feels. He tells him he was like, "Hey man, why don't you use your legs? You didn't use them in the first fight. You got fucking legs on you, man. Bounce around, and dance." And Holyfield's like, "Well, yeah, I guess." And it was brilliant in that second fight, but then of course the fiascos happened. And, talk about Fan Man and early '90s, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean that seemed to help Holyfield's momentum in that fight for sure. And well, I mean it kind of blunted Bo's momentum, but I mean I remember there was a magazine article. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think. I don't remember what magazine it was. It was either Sports Illustrated, it could have been The Ring, but it was right around that time, and it was a feature article about Riddick Bowe, and about half of the photos in the article were of his entourage.
Yep.
And there was like a shitload. There was like 15, maybe 18 photos in the entire piece, but then like half of them were of the art entourage. And I remember being like, I mean, I don't think it was at the time. It was probably a couple of years later or something like that. But I'm looking through the photos and being like, why aren't there more photos of like the fighter? Like, there's a whole bunch of, I don't know who the fuck this is. And I still don't know. Like, I could look back and I could tell you, I don't know who, no idea. Just like random characters. And as we know, having random characters in a fighter's entourage is never a good thing. That never winds up good. That's just more like mouths you got to feed, more people you got to mess with and go to, more people holding their hands out and shit like that when you get paid. It's just how it is. But I remember that was like kind of that was the thing. And then on top of that, like you bring up the food, and it was like that was George Foreman's thing, dude. He stole Jordan's for you. Like that was in the late 80s and early 90s. That was like all George Foreman used to fucking every interview. He'd like play up the whole I'm fat and I'm a fighter thing like on purpose, and he'd like exaggerate it and shit like that. He'd sit there with like a bucket of chicken in each arm and be like, "Rah, rah, rah," shit like that
But
just to
you
fuck
knew
around.
But you knew at the end of the day, and you saw it too, that like even though Foreman was thick, he was still in shape. Like he
He was
wasn't.
Diesel, bro. His fucking arms were just absolutely gigantic. I mean, he was not small during his first career, but in the second career, if you look at like the his fucking forearms are like the size of my head. It's huge. So obviously, yeah, dude, he was kind of fat and he was kind of slow and lumbering. That was also because he was in his 40s. But you know what I'm saying? So, but yeah, he played up the whole like I'm fat and I'm eating cheeseburgers thing. Actually was training. Bo actually was doing the cheeseburgers and the pizza and all sorts of shit. But he was actually doing it. It wasn't like a joke or
Yeah,
whatever. And but they were trying to kind of play it up like it was a joke. But the problem was that I think that there were already rumors behind the scenes that he was undisciplined. And then years after the fact, we can already know that during that time he was doing a lot of sparring and getting dinged around in sparring quite a bit. I remember Eddie Futch said that years later. He was like, he's too much sparring.
yeah. I mean, a long, long career. And these guys, I don't know what it is with being obsessed with sparring, but it's totally right. Terry Norris had the same issue where he just did numberless rounds of sparring, usually without headgear. They just like to fight, and
Yeah, they
um,
didn't want to train, but they'd want to fight.
fight, yeah. And Bo just, even though he loses the belt, he was already done by that point, basically. Like, not only for the fact that like he was getting lazy outside the ring and not take care of himself, but just the amount of punishment he took from the Holyfield fights, all three of them for that matter, and like his long career and stuff, and just it just kind of started happening overnight. Like it didn't happen immediately, but like you saw the slow regression. Like he has he loses the rematch with Holyfield, looks like shit against Buster Mathis Jr. Um, doesn't look much better against who was it, Herbie Hyde, in a weird sloppy fight where like Hyde rocked him a number of times and Bo was like physically hurt. And I think Bo said after the fight too that like Hyde was probably the hardest puncher he ever hit, like in terms of like one punch, walloping.
He
But
could
like
punch. I mean,
Hyde was a massive puncher. He just was extremely undersized against Bo. And
yeah, he's more of like a big cruiserweight than a heavyweight, but yeah.
yeah. And Bo was a big heavyweight for that time. And like it's just a weird fight where I said it's really sloppy. Bo doesn't really like use his skills like that. And Hyde, who's faster than Bo and has better power than Bo, hurts a number of times, but every time Bo kind of hit him back, Hyde would just drop. And then, till like, it got like almost embarrassing at that point till it got stopped. But then like so you had that. And then there
The
was
Gonzalez fight.
the Gonzalez fight where he put it together and he looked great again.
Yeah.
And partly because Gonzalez was talking so much shit beforehand, had beaten Bo as an amateur, where Bo was like, "Fuck this, I'm
Yep.
gonna, come back and do
He had to slap his lasagna mullet around a little bit.
yeah." And then he fights Holyfield in a rematch, and he doesn't look good in that either. Like that was a back and forth fight. We'll find out afterwards, Holyfield had hepatitis, and that's why he was like going through
Yeah.
energy changes. But like he dropped Bo and beat him up and was winning that fight generally until he got stopped because he had nothing left. And so you put that all in account, and then the Galata fights happen. That's when you really want to talk about the knuckleheadness of everything. Is really well, that sums it up because Bo comes in completely out of shape, right? Like just clearly doesn't give a shit, and he just looks sloppy. Galata at that point, who we could also put in this knucklehead category, um, doesn't. We don't really know how good he is yet at this point. Like we've seen him on TV against Samson Bahua, and that was a fiasco in itself. And then we saw him against Nicholson, Donnell Nicholson, and that fight in itself too. That like yeah, Galata looked good in it and showed skills, but like he also headbutted the shit out of Nicholson for no reason when Nicholson was like showing a little bit of like resistance. So you didn't really know what we were getting with him. And what we didn't realize that night was we were gonna get one of the most fucking infamous nights in boxing history. Did
It was so fucking crazy, dude. And
you
the
watch
fact
that
that
live? I
what's
watched that
that?
live. I said I watched that live with my dad. Did you watch that live?
I I feel like I did, but I can't say for sure that I did. I do remember like that day because at a minimum I remember knowing that it happened because of like Sports Center or the news or something. But I do remember that shit because it was like I just remember being like, what the fuck? Like how is that? You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
oh, dude, yeah. That speaking of fiascos, that shit was a massive fiasco and turned into just like a free for all.
Completely. I remember it took place on a weird, like either a Wednesday or Thursday or something, which
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah. I
itself. And
want
it
to say
was
it
a
was a
summer.
Thursday.
It was on summer. It was during the summertime.
Yeah,
The-
I want to
you
say it
know,
was like a Thursday or something because it was a really weird day.
yeah. And the first thing that was shocking for everybody was that like not Bo coming in bad shape. I mean, that was eye-opening because we thought he was finally taking his shit seriously again. But like there's the fact that Galata was like, I mean, looking like a fucking future Hall of Famer in there. That guy was moving around looking like, whipping off combinations like Gene Tunney or some shit. Just like beautiful.
Yeah, he had it all that night too. He was like moving, fucking pop, pop, pop,
Yeah,
pop,
and
pop,
he was like jab was working great, throwing
body shots,
overhead punch
everything.
combinations, body punches. Like Bo had nothing, but I mean, Galata was looking brilliant. He was like, wow, everybody was just like, holy fuck, man,
Yeah,
who is this?
Bo came in looking like shit, but Galata was like, all right, then I will help dispatch you. I will show
Yeah,
you on your way.
and then after that, he starts hitting him low and keeps on hitting him low, and you're like, what are you doing? Like you're winning here. Bo don't have nothing. Like stop this, stop this. And then his trainers are pleading with him, please, Andrew, stop hitting him in the body. Just don't even go to the body anymore. Like you got this fight won. And even like who was the referee? Jay, no, it wasn't Jane. I don't remember. Um,
Oh, it was
guy
fucking
that's
was it
since passed,
Wayne Kelly or was that the
Wayne Kelly.
rematch?
Wayne Kelly. Wayne Kelly was the referee for this one. Yeah. And
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, go ahead.
yeah, everybody's just kind of looking at him like, bro, what the fuck? Like it just made no sense. You know what I mean? Like it just made like and once Bo got dropped again for like the umpteenth time from another low blow in whatever round, like round 7 or 8 or something like that when it ended. I mean, that's when everything, all hell broke loose. That entourage that you've seen in other instances getting rowdy at other Bo fights when they beat the shit out of Fan Man and other times, well, it came to its zenith that night.
That's right. That right. You're right. It was Wayne Kelly the first one because they got Eddie Cotton for the second one because they were like, "Oh, we need a big referee that can blah blah blah," and it didn't wind up making a fucking hill of
Wayne Kelly
beans
was
per
not a
se.
small guy himself. He was a big
No,
referee.
not
Yeah.
even. He was like like every single referee ever. I want to say he was like a former cop and like, like every single fucking. Why is every single referee like a former cop? The fuck? I don't know.
Because they still get to be in charge for be the third man
Yeah,
in the
something.
ring.
You get to yell at fucking people. And anyway, yeah, fucking that's right. I totally forgot about that. And during the whole legendary nights, remember what Wayne Kelly said? It almost like the way that he said it almost sounded like he was totally making it up. But according to Wayne Kelly, that he said that he went pre-fight and he was explaining to Galata the rules or whatever, and that Galata he was like he turned to me and he said, "I do whatever I have to do to win," or something like that. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
did he really say that? I don't know if he even fucking said that, but
I don't know, man. Sam Colonna said, was it Colonna, Corona? Sam Colonna, Galata's trainer from the Chicago area. I think he made the comment after he was like, Andrew, did you bite him? Talking about Samson Bahua. And he said, Andrew looked at him and said, I had to bite the motherfucker. So he might have had, might
I
probably
mean,
did.
yeah, that's true. He might have, dude. I mean, he looked pretty wild-eyed and surprised even now at the Hall of Fame, whatever it was last year. So I don't know, man. I don't know. Hopefully he found inner peace. But that was a wild night, dude, because it was like a set off a chain reaction, bro. Like it went from he hit him low like 9,000 times, the fight gets stopped, fucking Bo's entourage gets into it, starts attacking him, and then like his corner goes in to defend their guy. That
Beautiful
spreads
collapse.
out into the audience, like wild.
Yeah. And Bo, I mean, after that, he fights the rematch again, gets his ass kicked on that, and then it's sad. You know what I mean? Like everything's really sad what happens, and it's bad too. Like, the domestic issues that he has with his wife. I think then he like kidnapped them at one point or something.
He dude yeah, in like 97 or 98, he kidnapped his wife and kids and like thank goodness no it did not end more tragic. That's what I was saying is that it had all the makings of something that was going to end far more tragically and thankfully fucking did not. But it took like 5 years to even for him to go to get sentenced to prison because
Mhm.
part of his defense was that he took too many punches and
Yeah, I
that
remember that. Yeah. Mhm.
looped him out or something like that. And then after he got out of prison, like the first thing he did was get licensed in California.
And that got aired too, you know. That was he comes back, he beats up who did he fight? Marcus Rhodes.
Billy
He,
Zumbrun was one of the
that's right.
dudes, and Billy Zumbrun was the dude who had killed his previous opponent.
Yeah. Bradley Roan, I believe the name was. And that, I say for that fight too. Like, I don't. It's sad that Zumbrum was a part of that, but I don't play. Clearly, he had.
No, and I don't
There's
mean to
no blame
suggest
on that.
like that.
Yeah,
No, no,
yeah. No,
no.
no, no, no. I know you weren't. I know you weren't, and stuff like that. But that is
I
very
know
true.
people say shit like that, like the whole
They
fucking
do. They'll
Max
try to be
Bayer
like, "Oh
thing.
yeah, no, he killed him." No, he didn't. Poor Bradley Roan, and that's a tragic story in itself. The guy was a journeyman heavyweight that fought literally everybody and was overweight, and I think some other stuff going on. He lost his mom, and he was like, by all accounts, like that was the closest person in his life. And he had this fight just to get some money for her funeral, and I guess he died of a heart attack in the middle of it. People attribute it to like having a broken heart, but like. That's whatever. That's neither here nor there. But like Zumbroma had been around, you know what I mean? I think he'd beaten Butterbean and like other guys on the Midwest
Oh yeah,
circuit.
he was like
It's-
he was a well-known kind of
yeah,
journeymanish type of guy. Yeah.
exactly. But my God, man, that was that weird time on Fox when they were doing that best damn sports show shit or whatever, and they would air fights for it and
Yeah, they were trying to make James Toney their guy for a minute.
yes. Yeah. And then every time Tony ended up on it, he like ended up blowing out some kind of thing on his either shoulder or knee, whatever. Like breaking some kind of
Steroids. Yeah.
steroids. Yeah. So you get to this fight and like Bo was like, yeah, I've had a couple of comeback fights and like, oh my God, he was so overweight, bad, and Zumbrum just kind of beat him like a fucking fat water bag over the fight, over 10 rounds. And Bo somehow scored a decision, I think.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was, and I think that was his final, like, because he couldn't get
Professional.
licensed after that.
Because it was like he shouldn't have been licensed in the first place. Like anytime you go out there and use the defense that you're brain damaged, that's why you did X, Y, and Z.
Oh
Shouldn't that
no,
be a
he
not
had
be
the fight in
licensed?
Germany after that. Oh
Oh, yeah.
Jesus.
But it's sad too, man. Bo clearly is one of those guys. If you see him today, he's definitely brain damaged and he has a lot of stuff going on. And it's too bad. He took a lot of punishment in his career. Like it's not.
Yeah,
I hate to say it, but it's not going to end well for him. I guess in terms of like his dege- uh degenerative, like, cognitive skills are going to go pretty, what I mean? It's just going to get worse. And probably same for Holyfield and others. Like, it's just how it is in terms of boxing and, careers and stuff like that. You last long enough and you start feeling the lingering effects eventually starts taking over. But, for that brief period, man, and before like his gluttonous, bad decision making and just people around him giving him all this bad advice and being a product of his environment. You know what I mean? He got caught up of the early 90s. A lot of those guys got swallowed up in that era, and Bo was just another one. And yeah, but that
I
was a
had
good one. Go ahead.
I had to look, and this was maybe like a month ago, just because I was curious, dude. I was like, what the fuck is Rock Newman up to these days? Like, where is that guy?
Yeah, what is he doing?
You know what I'm saying? And I was like, where is this dude? And so I did an internet search, and I'm sorry to laugh. Because I'm not like I don't have any business judging the blackness of anybody.
Oh boy.
I'm not. I'm simply saying that I do remember at the time that Rock Newman claiming he was black, and there were a bunch of black people who were like, "No, the fuck, you are not."
Hmm.
And he was insisting, like he was like, "No, I'm black." Again, I don't know
Sure.
whether he is or not, and I don't give a fuck. I just simply thought that that was hilarious, given that now he hosts a podcast about being black.
Oh boy.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's total rock. That's the only way
Oh no,
Rock
no, no,
Newman.
absolutely too. And I can still see him there. Probably still has his beard tied up or some shit, and he's just there yapping.
He looks pretty much, he looks like Orson Welles still. He
Yeah.
looks like fucking Orson Welles, bro.
Rock Newman. He really did settle in for that over the early 90s. He basically fit in perfectly for what the boxing world was going on there, being both sport spokesperson and all this other shit, man. Dude was an absolute psychopath.
He's
But
crazy. The entire
uh,
entourage was nuts, bro.
totally. The last dude I'll bring up, and we can just talk about him briefly. Um, Keeping along with the 90s. I guess, in the heavyweights of that era. Ike. And
Whew.
I mean, Ike Abaya, yeah. Talk
Well,
about real knuckleheads and just,
well, and I
and that's
guess
where you mean, and this is what we mean by we were talking about saying it's going to cross over into like a little bit of a dark thing and
and
all that. There's nothing really humorous about what happened with like Ibeabuchi. Um,
like
again,
I feel like we're seeing a theme here. Like it's
yeah,
starting out lighthearted and building into oh Jesus Christ with like pretty much everyone.
totally. And Ibeabuchi, especially because of, the circumstances of what he ended up doing and just, fuck him. But like,
Yeah,
what a
dude.
roller coaster that was with him early on. Like,
What a strange character for everybody to venerate and be like, "Oh, what a hero!" Like, really? Eek.
there's nothing heroish about him. I mean, that we've all made jokes like, "Oh yeah, not my president" or something like that. But like, at the end of the day, what the stuff he ended up doing was just like, heinous and beyond repair for anything. But like, it's just when he came on the scene, bro, everybody was hyped. I mean, we all were. Like, he just had that look. No one had taken David to a punishment the way he did. He was unknown. I didn't, as a person back then as a fan, took pride in knowing almost everybody that was going to be fighting on Boxing After Dark or anything for that matter, because I followed it all and I watched it all. I had no idea who Ibe Ibuchi was. I didn't, when I found out he was fighting Tua, I didn't watch that live. I'm assuming for whatever reason I had something going on that night, but like I don't recall thinking to myself, yeah, I'm gonna be missing out on anything crazy, and
Yeah, I saw it like a year later or something, maybe.
yeah, and that just ended up, when I read afterwards that he lost, I was like, whoa, like I didn't, and to find out too that it was like an incredible fight was like even more so mind blowing because like that Ibeabuchi, man, not only did he take the punishment of that Tua dealt him that no one at that point was able to stand up to. Like he took some massive shots. He was breaking CompuBox records in terms of how many punches thrown in. He just outworked him and outlanded him and just out did everything that night. He looked like the total package, and that was and for a person that you can't have a better coming out party than that. So
I thought Tua could have won that fight, but that still doesn't even change anything that you said because it was an
yeah,
incredible fight. And nobody, I mean, nobody before that and nobody that I can think of after that, at least right off the top of my head, ever stood in front of Tua that way and, threw bombs with him. Like,
sure.
and there was some movement, he would have been foolish to just totally
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
lock in there, but still, like, he took some shots, bro. And he also delivered some shots on Tua, too. Tua showed a fucking massive chin himself. um, yeah, I didn't know who Chris Bird was at that time, so that wouldn't have really that wouldn't have resonated with me had I known, about that at the time either. But looking back, I remember there were in like the early 2000s, like right around 2000, 2001, a number of the fights that were like in the tape trading circles that were going around that a lot of people were really like chomping at the bit to get were some of Ibeabuchi's televised fights. Like there was Ray Ennis and ooh, I can't remember which other one off the top of my head, but there were like two or three of his fights apart from the Chris Bird fight and the Tua fight that had been televised and that were like, popular because people wanted to know like it was still recent he had just been put away not long before that and people were like oh we got to see him because he's going to come back, he's going to get released. That was one of the I talk about this semi frequently on the show. That was one of the talking points, like when is Mike Tyson going to come back and rule the division? When
Sure.
is Naseem Hamed going to come back? And then when is Ike Ibeabuchi getting out of prison was one of the other ones. And so everyone wanted to see the earlier IK Ibuchi fights that weren't the Chris Bird fight or Tua fights. So anyway, I do remember right around that time that they were kind of floating around. But yeah, dude, he just kind of slowly devolved as soon as he started having his relationship, I guess you could say, with HBO. It
Yeah.
sounded like that was pretty much when stuff started really going south. I don't know if it got to his head. I don't know if he already had some pre-existing,
I think he
uh
did.
he probably had some pre-existing mental illness because a lot of people talk about he used to talk about like spirits and
Yep.
weird shit like that even before he got really famous.
Cedric was telling me how they'd be at dinner negotiating an HBO contract, and all of a sudden Ike would like grab the fork and knife at the table and start slamming it down and going, "No, no, I demand to be called president," and yeah, and start yelling about all kinds of random shit. And Cedric would just kind of be looking at the HBO executives and looking at Ike and just kind of going like, this is the last thing I need. These guys need to be hearing right now, right? Um, but there was a couple of other instances too, like after the Tua fight, and then he went away for a minute. I don't know if he got in trouble again after that. I think he might have. Like there was some already, yeah, there was already some out of the ring stuff starting to like surface, and then he took a year off after he fought Tua. It took a year to come back, and then he had a couple of quick fights, and
I
still
think that was the accident.
the car accident.
I think so.
Okay, yes, I believe you're right. I think you're right. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Whereas, and just in case anybody's like, what car accident? His stepson, or if it wasn't his stepson, it was his girlfriend's son, who was like 11 or something like that, took this kid into a car and according to the kid, intentionally crashed the car on the freeway.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Which is
mean, not lighthearted. Just to make sure nobody thinks I'm making light of that. Not lighthearted.
Nah, it's absolutely fucked up to thinking about that. Like that's a
But
disgusting thing.
it was, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it was also kept under wraps. They like almost none of it was getting out in like the regular news.
Sure. And you're totally right. So that's right. He takes a year off because of that issue and things happen for that, right? And then then the Bird fight happens. And at this point, like, Bird had been featured on HBO a few times and he's been featured on television many times, former Olympian and the
Yep.
fact
Yeah. He was
that
known on the amateurs and all that stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
he was a known guy, and the fact that he was such a small heavyweight that it was like, oh, a middleweight that purposely moved up to heavyweight is like had that appeal too, right? So the fight with Bird is in 99, all right, and it's kind of like a David versus Goliath thing because Ibeabuchi's so much bigger than him. Not merely height wise, but just size, right? He's just
Yeah. Well, yeah, Bird looks like slightly flabby almost, but like
yeah,
Ibeabuchi's fucking hulking, you know?
yep. And Bird right away for like the first 2 or 3 rounds completely befuddles him. Ibeabuchi looks a little ponderous, as most guys did fighting Bird back then, right? But then once Ibeabuchi started churning up and started working and started throwing more and got it to the point where like Curtis Cokes, Hall of Fame former welterweight champion who was his trainer, was telling him, "Hey man, don't worry about trying to like catch him clean. Just touch him. Keep on touching him. You use your jab in the overtime. He's not strong enough to like keep you off of him." And eventually, when you corner him, just keep on hitting him anywhere you can hit him. And that worked out perfectly. Bird would get in the corner, try to slip away. Ibeabuchi hit him shoulder, blah. Eventually, Bird tires down, and that's when Ibeabuchi flattens him with that ridiculous knockout at the end, right? The boom, boom, boom. And
Yeah, dude.
Bird coming out, looking at the referee because he's already concussed. Fucking boogers, like Jewel and shit, his mouthpiece knocked out. Like it was a nasty knockout. Like absolutely like concussed knockout. And for a guy that was able to do that to Bird, who everybody was avoiding, no one was trying to go out of their way to fight Bird at that point. That put Ibeabuchi on the cusp of everything. You know what I mean? All those at that point, the world was at his fingertips in terms of what he could possibly accomplish. And I do remember, tell me if you remember this too, that there was tentatively scheduled to have him and Michael Grant fight each other. I guess just to be like the consensus number one to fight Lewis next, right? And that would have been for that time, that would have been a big fight. I think they still would have just put that on regular HBO, but today that would have been massive on pay-per-view. That would have been a big pay-per-view event. And but no, everything completely fell apart after that.
I don't know if it was Cedric. And I mean, it almost makes sense that it might have been because, and for anybody listening, like Cedric Kushner, uh, um, I almost feel like it probably was because since he's been dead, there haven't really been very many African
Mm-hmm.
heavyweights that have shown up. But, you know, in the late 80s through to the early 2000s, there were a whole bunch of Zimbabwean, South African, Nigerian. Those were probably, I would say, probably the main countries in Africa that they seem to come from. But a whole bunch of heavyweights. And you know, the with US boxing press, their whole fascination was, oh, they got funny names. You know, that's all they could really fucking do. But
Mm-hmm.
like there were a whole bunch of them. that had come over. They helped fill out the division. David Aizonrate, a whole bunch
I
of really
remember him.
fun
Yeah, yeah.
fights. Friday Ahunanya, Courage Shabalala, a number of fighters, on that level that were Duncan Dukuwari, a number of fighters that were really fun fighters. Most of them, didn't quite get over the hump of the contendership, but man, they really helped fill the division out, dude. And Ike Ibeabuchi was kind of among those fighters. That's what makes me kind of feel like it probably did have something to do with Cedric.
I mean, Cedric definitely had a pipeline with anything involving South African fighters and um some other fighters overseas. Like he had connections. You know what I mean? Like for instance, the late Mzi Nguni, who was the trainer of champions like Baby Jake Malala and Vianney Bungu, Welcome Nita, all those champions that you remember from like the 90s. Nguni probably either him or who was the white guy that was the trainer? Remember he had the long hair?
Nick Durant.
Nick Durant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those two were probably involved at some point or another with those guys. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
also,
he's
yeah,
trained fucking and sorry. My
yeah,
brain starts going, where the history
sure. Nick Durant was that good dude too. Man. He always had a loud personality in the corner. By all accounts, was a very good trainer. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, Cedric definitely had a lifeline to those guys. But Ibeabuchi was. That's the thing, man. Cedric always had bad luck. Every time he really had somebody that like he built up and he got into a certain point, like Shane Mosley and others, they just Hasim Rahman, they drop him like a bad habit. Ibeabuchi didn't even give
He
him a
was
chance to
just
do
the
that. Like
hard luck fucking promoter. Fuck.
yeah,
Fucking
and
guy.
that's why that's why Cedric said before during the Rockmont fight, the first one against Lewis, he was like, he said he was sitting there and he liked what he was watching and he was kind of look, he was like, I'm not really a bad guy. And he was like, can I just win one of these, just one of these one big ones at least once? I just deserve that. Can I just get one of these? And then it happened and he was just kind of like, but yeah, Ibeabuchi, man, like he would have beat Michael Grant because we ended up seeing what ended up becoming of Grant. And like Grant had that good win over Galata. He got dropped and all that, but like it wasn't there. And a guy like Ike, who had clearly proven at that point that he could take a world-class punch and he had better skills than Grant did overall and all that, probably would have taken him apart within 6, 7 rounds, if we're being honest, right? And who knows? Who knows what could have been after with Lewis? That's a fascinating thing to think about. But when I said things get dark, it got even darker for him because not only what he did with that kid and everything like that, now he got arrested. I think it was, didn't he say he raped somebody or he tried to, or he attacked
Uh
some dancer or something like that, right?
yeah. He invited in
A woman, yeah.
yeah,
Someone over. Yeah.
some, the reports kind of vary, but an escort or a dancer or somebody, some sort of sex worker, I believe, up to his hotel room and then refused to let her leave and assaulted her. So, I mean, it was, yeah, dark, about as dark as you can get, short
And he
of
wouldn't
death.
he wouldn't leave the room, right? They had to like pepper spray under the door for him to get out.
Oh yeah, it was a big, like, he like barricaded himself, and now it was actually for years it was tough to find any sort of details about what exactly had happened. And that's not to say that I want to like relive anybody's account of this, but you do get curious because there were rumors about a lot of stuff that had happened. Nobody knew any details. And I mean, again, not that I'm like living in the details, but people want to know. But then it was almost kind of like once we found out, we were like, so that's what happened to him. Well, maybe it's good that he's not here. Maybe it's good that he's locked up. And I hope that he did find, look, he being totally serious, he went through years and years and years of issues with potential deportation with ICE.
Yeah.
And then also he did get deported and then found his way back to the US and I believe got deported again. And then was talking about potentially coming back about 2 years ago. In terms of his actual shape, he looked good. Like, I mean, for
Yeah.
especially for a guy his age, but there's obviously absolutely no way whatsoever anything would happen. But I mean, yeah, a lot of wasted potential.
It's crazy too. Think about this. When he initially got released, I'm thinking this might be almost a decade ago now, right? Um,
He
because
he went through
he gets
immigration shit for a long time.
he gets released. photo surface of him, like you said, looking absolutely ridiculously in shape. And then it comes out that he signed with Michael Kontz. That's why I say I feel like this was like a decade ago because Kontz was still with Pacquiao. And then they were going to set it up. And then once he got out there, like he signed with Michael Kontz. And then I guess Aaron was going to promote some of his fights. Like, of course, Aaron was, sees money involved. He's like, fuck it. And you remember that the initial plan was that he was going to fight Andy Ruiz on a Pacquiao undercard.
I remember hearing about that and being like, "Oh God, I hope not."
Yeah, how do you think that would happen? How do you think that would have unfolded?
You
I
know
mean,
what's
Ruiz was a
really fucked up is that Andy Ruiz is so inconsistent. Who knows?
and Ruiz was like definitely like big back then. And we're talking
Yeah,
like early Andy Ruiz where he's like big. And it would make sense that they would try to put Ibeabuchi in with him because like the dude was so wide and everything. It seemed like it would be an easy proposition potentially.
yeah. I mean, if there's even like a winnable fight, and that's
Yeah.
what was so wild was that Andy Ruiz actually did good against who was a Joseph Parker, and a lot of people thought he won that fight, and people are like,
Yeah.
"Oh, is he actually a good fighter? What happened?" And it turns out, oh, he actually does have a whole lot of talent. He's just in shit shape. But I mean, Jesus Christ, dude. Yeah, I don't know, man. Uh, they're especially in that post Lewis era. Who fucking knows, dude? Like, had he kept it together and stayed in shape, etc. But yeah, just a wild story. And gosh, dude, pray for his freaking victims.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all you can say is pray for those victims.
Yowza. Well, like I said, I think that we rode the rail pretty good. I think
Yeah.
I think that we tried not to talk about too much of the dark stuff, kept it pretty funny.
And we did too for the most part. You know what I mean? Like you talked about just some of the out of the ring antics of like Camacho and those other dudes or Lou Jenkins taking a motorcycle crash and then going to fight the next day against Henry Armstrong or some shit.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, they were just different people back then, bro. Different
Just
fucking
walking into
people.
the place. What the hell happened to you last night? I can fight.
Yeah, and then meanwhile we got Ryan Garcia who can't keep his hands off the fucking Mark Chagall in a fucking hotel room in LA or something. What the fuck? Mark Chagall's a painter, by the way, everybody who's uncultured listening, you fucking jerks. But anyway, yeah, dude, it's Jesus Christ. A bunch of knuckleheads. That's what
Yes.
the show is about. A bunch of fucking knuckleheads. And so the only other thing that I was going to say that I forgot to say at the beginning was I am aware that some people, when they hear the word knucklehead, they think that they're mean like gangster or like,
Yeah, yeah.
for the white, like gangbangers. No, we just mean like goofballs, idiots, dumbasses, whatever. So don't get all mad. And if you get all mad, leave a comment about how mad you are. It'll be funny. We'll make funny. Anyway, Eris, I appreciate it, dude. It's always a lot of fun
All right.
reliving the 80s and 90s, especially. But thanks, man,
Definitely, man. Always a pleasure doing this. Till the next one.
for sure. Everybody who listened in, we appreciate you. Thanks so much for listening to whatever podcast app you listen in on. They should be all square now. So hopefully everything is all good with the Spotify's and the Apples and all those things. But if you do listen on podcast apps, go ahead and subscribe, leave a rating, comment. Those things are helpful. If you watch on YouTube, same thing. Subscribe, comment, try to make it back, et cetera, et cetera. As far as social media goes, we're still tentatively on X/Twitter. My boy Aris is on there as Punch Zone Aris. On there is Boxing History, still kind of sometimes blah blah blah. And then we're also on Instagram and Facebook with the Knuckles and Gloves Boxing Radio page. Aris,
Yep.
talk soon, man.
That was a pleasure, everyone. Have a good one.
Take it easy, everybody.